These are real 911 calls, disturbing, mysterious, and true. Each story will send chills down your spine and slowly drift you into sleep. This story is completely free. We don't put any ads, which means we don't earn anything from these videos. All we ask is one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It's free for you, but it gives us the motivation to keep making more real police stories every night. Also, tell us in the comments which city are you watching from and what time is it right now. We love reading your messages. Now, let's begin the story. Story number 1. I've been on the job long enough to know that most 911 hang-ups are exactly what they seem. Pocket dials, kids testing boundaries, a mishap on an old phone in a kitchen drawer. You still go. You always go. But you don't expect much. This one came in at 2:13 a.m. November in our county side of the state always feels colder than the thermometer says. The fog lays low in the bottoms, and everything metal feels damp. I was 2 coffees into the graveyard shift, running County Road 12 east of town. Dispatch said we had a hang-up from a landline, no voice contact, mapping to an address I recognized, but had never been inside. 4,417 North Line, the old Jenkins place. It had been on and off the market for a year. We'd run calls nearby for stray livestock and a brush fire that fizzled before we got there, but no one lived in it as far as I knew. 3 to 14 and 3 to 21. Copy 911 hang-up, 4,417 North Line Road, dispatch said. Matter of fact and calm like she always is. The voice you start to count as a friend, when it's the only one cutting through the radio for hours. Call number is a hard line. No callback established. Map shows center of structure. Units in the area? I was 3 to 21 that night. Mason was 3 to 14. We'd both been quiet since midnight. 3 to 21, I'm about 5 out, I said, thumb pressing the mic, watching the white beams of my cruiser reach into the fog like they were feeling their way. 3 to 14, I'm behind 21 by a couple, Mason added. Copy. Caller disconnected. Open line for 14 seconds. No sound, dispatch said. No prior calls from that number. That last part stuck to me. In a county with more cows than people, old addresses have old stories. Copy, I said. You got owner info? She paused. I could hear her keyboard. Last utility subscriber was a realtor. Listing shows vacant. Power is supposed to be off. Phone service shows disconnected 6 months ago. So where'd the call come from? Mason said before I could. He's not a chatty guy, but you could hear a smile trying to get through. He does that when something feels off. Working on it, dispatch replied. Just get eyes on. I turned up the driveway. Gravel cracked under the tires like ice. It's a long pull to the Jenkins house, straight under a break of poplars that always whisper, even when the wind isn't up. My headlights picked out reflectors on a rusted gate, and the mailbox leaning like a tired man. The house itself sat back under the trees, a simple 2-story farmhouse with a sagging porch and a pitched roof. The kind you picture when you hear the word farmhouse. There was a tiny outbuilding to the right, maybe an old smokehouse or tool shed. The porch boards shone like they were wet. But it was just due. We go by the book. I parked with my nose out toward the drive, a little offset of the front steps. I saw Mason's lights turn in behind me, then dip as he killed his headlights. He always does that early. The routine looks the same as any other call. Routine is what keeps you steady. Dispatch, 3 to 21, I said, stepping out and pulling my coat tight. The air bit more than it should have. Show us 10 to 97. On scene. My breath puffed and drifted. Frogs sang somewhere deep. It made an odd, hollow sound under the fog. Copy 3 to 21, 10 to 97. We stood for a moment at the bottom of the steps, listening. You can learn a lot by doing nothing for 5 seconds. The house gave me nothing. No TV flicker. No heater cycling. No neighbor dog. I tapped the porch railing with my glove. Wood thudded soft and damp. The kind of sound that says, careful with your weight. Sheriff's office, I called, loud enough to carry but not startle the night into a panic. Hello? Sheriff's office. We got a 911 call from this address. We waited. Mozzie hum. The sigh of the big trees. Nothing from the house. Mason angled toward the windows with his flashlight, his beam walking the glass and falling across empty walls. The windows were dusty, the kind of film that catches a cone of light. No curtains. It looked like a magazine staging before furniture shows up, except different. There were old outlines on the walls where picture frames had been, rectangles of cleaner paint. You only see that when something leaves, and no one moves in. Door looks shut, Mason murmured. He gave me a nod, and I mounted the steps. They were soft, but they held. The door was cheap and newish, with a brushed nickel knob. It had a lockbox hanging under it, the kind realtors use. That matched dispatch's info. The weather stripping at the bottom had a wedge of leaves pressed against it like a dam. I knocked. "Sheriff's office," I called again. Something answered, but not the way you want. A faint, electrical hum, like when a refrigerator comes alive in the next room. It could have been my imagination. It could have been the way sound gives itself jobs at 2 in the morning. It was there long enough for me to notice, then it was gone. I tried the knob. It turned. The door stuck like sticker tape on the threshold, then opened with a little sigh. Cold, dark air pushed out around us like it had been waiting for the chance. It smelled like old wood, like cardboard, like the stale end of a winter afternoon. "Dispatch 3 to 21, I said. "We've got an unlocked door. Making entry for a welfare check." "Copy," she said immediately. And then, 2 heartbeats later, "Be advised, another call just hit from the same number. Open line, I can hear." She broke, like she was leaning closer to her headset. "I can hear breathing, very faint." Mason looked at me. I nodded. He put his hand against the jamb and eased in. "We move slow on these. You learn to make your steps part of the quiet, instead of fighting it." Inside was a single open room, wood floors, a staircase rising to the left. My light found a small table against the back wall with a corded phone on it. Beige, the kind that always gets sticky with time. The coiled cord looped to the handset. I walked over, trying not to track footprints, though there was enough dust on the floor that I could see marks that weren't ours already, wide scuffs, like something heavy had been dragged at some point and then abandoned. The phone sat too neatly in the middle of the table. No dust ring around it. Like someone had wiped only that surface, and nothing else. "Hello?" I called again. "Sheriff's office. If you can hear me, call out." I held my breath and listened. From somewhere above us, a soft, soft thump. The kind you make by placing your foot down in a room where you aren't supposed to be. Mason pointed up with 2 fingers. I nodded. "County," I said into my mic, instincts tugging me toward the protocol like a handrail. "We hear possible footfalls upstairs." Announcing ourselves again. "If you lose contact, start another unit." "Copy," dispatch said. "Square and calm. The way you want it." 3 to 7 is en route. We took the stairs one at a time. Old wood always talks. These steps didn't. That bothered me. Upstairs was a narrow hall with 3 doorways. My light swept left to right. Empty bedroom. A second empty room with 2 pale squares on the floor where a rug had been. The third door was shut. It had one of those cheap hollow core panels, painted a little too bright for the rest of the house. There was a sticker on it, half peeled, of a football team logo that went out of fashion a decade ago. "Sheriff's office," I said, softer now and closer. "If you're up here, say something." Something said something, not a voice. More like the shape of a voice. A breath close to a microphone. The kind of scrubbing static you hear when someone brushes a sleeve against a phone. It came from my radio, not the room. "Dispatch?" I said. "You got another open line?" "Affirm," she said, and her own voice had flattened a touch, like she'd set her elbow on the desk. "It's the same number, 4,417. Open line returned. No voice. If I had to call it, I'd say a whisper. Can't make out words. I felt the small hairs stand on my arms. That doesn't mean anything by itself. Bodies are old radios, but I felt it. "Okay," I said, and looked at Mason. He'd heard it too. He shrugged with his eyes, which is how you say we keep going without saying we keep going. We stepped up to the door, flanking it. I put my hand on the knob. It turned easily. The door opened on darkness. My light fell across a short room with a slanted ceiling. A child's room once, if you read it like a cop. 2 small nail holes where a shelf had been. 3 stickers on the baseboard like rocket ships. The faded imprint of something circular on the carpet, where a toy bin had lived. No furniture now. No shoes. No person. But there was one thing that made my throat tighten. A little imprint in the carpet near the window. The outline of where a chair had sat a long time, and then been lifted away. In the dusting of grit, there were oval patches of clean where feet would have rested if you were sitting there and watching the driveway. We didn't speak. I crossed to the window. The glass was cold. My light angled down over the yard and caught my cruiser. I could see our footprints in the dew on the grass where we'd walked up, clear as if drawn with chalk. No other prints. No vehicle tracks except ours and some old ones, rained soft and gone. I turned back. Mason's light rested on the far corner of the room, and I saw what he was holding it on. A phone jack. The old kind, a little plastic rectangle screwed to the wall. The faceplate was a hair, crooked, like someone had removed it and put it back without a level. The phone jack had nothing plugged into it. The corded phone downstairs had been on the table by itself. I tried to imagine a line alive enough to call 911 and lay so dead in the rest of the house. My radio popped again. Not dispatch this time. An open carrier static, someone else's feed stepping on ours for half a second. In that fuzz, I thought I heard 2 syllables low and quick. It could have been anything. It sounded like, "It's me." "Say again," I said, even though I knew I wasn't going to get anything back. Mason's head tilted slightly, listening. We both listened so hard it hurt our ears. Nothing came. We cleared the rest of the upstairs. Closet. Linen cupboard empty, but for a single folded pillowcase. Oddly neat. Bathroom with no mirror and the vanity drawers pulled out, like someone had wanted to prove to someone else there was nothing to hide. We found nothing that would talk to a report. Back downstairs, I went to the beige phone. I picked up the handset. No dial tone. Dead. I held it there anyway, cheek to plastic that had lived other lives in other houses. My ear filled with that particular silence phones have, the blank between worlds. And then, as if a finger found a wire somewhere deep in the walls, I heard a single click. Not a dial tone. Not a human. Just that clean, mechanical click of connection, and then nothing again. "Dispatch, 3 to 21, I said slowly, still holding the phone to my ear like it might decide to behave if we acted like it always did. "Advise phone is present, corded set, no dial tone." We heard an open carrier on the radio. "You still getting callbacks?" "Yes," she said. "In fact, hold on." Her words drifted like she was glancing away. "We just got a 3rd hit, 4 seconds, whispered words. I could swear it said hello, but I can't stamp that as fact. No caller ID. The trunk is showing the old Northline exchange. Phone company confirms that number's inactive. Mason had his ear near the base of the phone, like he was trying to hear through the plastic. He's a big guy. The picture of him peering at that flimsy rectangle of a machine was almost funny if it hadn't been 2:30 and if we hadn't been standing in a house that whispered back. We cleared the outbuilding and the basement, because you always do. The basement smelled wet, cool on your ankles, the air falling off the steps like you were walking into a poured bowl. Spiderwebs. A water heater that looked new enough that someone, somewhere, had cared about this place within a year or 2. There were chalk marks on one of the beam's simple pencil lines counting something. 1, 2, 3, 5 hash marks slashed through like a previous owner tracking paint coats or screws. I followed them with my light, line after line, and felt a small relief at the normal humanness of it. Little bits like that save you when the bigger pieces don't make sense. On our way back up, my radio made a tone I hadn't heard in months. A ringback from dispatch, a test tone they can send to a unit if they need to get your attention. But she hadn't done it. We clarified later. In the moment, it sounded like a phone ringing in a house that had no phones. We stepped out onto the porch and let the night breathe over us. The sky was lifting to a thin gray that meant morning was thinking about climbing the horizon. The fog had thinned into sheets. I heard a distant truck on the highway, low and heavy. A reminder there's a world that keeps moving while you stand still. 3 to 21, dispatch said. Back to business like. phone company is on the line. They show that number as disconnected. However, they're seeing something on the 911 trunk, a ghost line from a legacy switch. They say it can't originate calls. Their words, not mine. Copy, I said. I could feel the shape of a shrug between my shoulder blades. You want us to secure anything? Negative. Document and clear when ready. 3 to 7 is in your area if you need him. We stayed another 15 minutes. We stood in the living room and listened to the silence you only get when insulation is old and wind presses the house skin from the outside. We wrote down the timestamps. 2:13 first call, 2:24 second, 2:31 third. We took a picture of the phone on the table, the faceplate upstairs. I took a photo of the footprints we hadn't made in the dust, just scuffs really, arcs and lines like someone had moved a chair and nothing else. When we left, I closed the door and pulled it against the weather strip. It sealed like a lid. The lockbox hung there, mute. Mason didn't say anything until we were at the bottom of the steps. You hear that thing click? He asked. His voice was too normal, on purpose. I did, I said. Deadline, he said. Deadline? I agreed. On the drive back to the road, my headlights flared off the mailbox. 4,417. The numbers were crooked, the 4 sitting higher than the rest. You notice dumb things like that after a call. We cleared the scene. Dispatch wrote it up as unfounded on our CAD, which is as neat a word as you can ask for when your brain wants neat words. I went back to patrol. You can't carry everything with you in a car. You'll drive yourself into the ditch if you try. We learned more in trickles. 2 days later, an email went around from the 911 center supervisor. The short version, minus the part where I tell you I read it 3 times with my coffee cooling in my hand, was that the phone company had done a little archaeology on their end. The Northline Exchange had an old switch that still routed certain abandoned numbers in a way that made them show as present on the 911 trunk if a test ping hit it just right. That's as far as I could follow. The tech wrote that it was non-functional. They used that phrase like, it should make us feel better. A week after that, Mason forwarded me a voicemail he got from a realtor. It was recorded at 4:02 the morning. The voice was thin with sleep. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't want to bug you, but my lockbox at 4,417 was open when I went by last evening to show the place. I thought you guys had opened it. But my app says no one pulled a key. And also, this is probably nothing, but the landline on the wall upstairs, someone took the faceplate off. She laughed once, a little too high. There is no landline, of course. I don't even know why I'm saying landline. I guess I mean the thing where a phone would go. I asked her to send a photo. She did. It looked like our photo, except the plastic faceplate now sat on the floor under it. 2 tiny screws resting beside it, like carefully laid coins. I haven't been back. Plenty of other calls have washed through my ears since then. Nights tangle up with nights. But once, a month after, Dispatch had a slow moment and told me something I didn't write down because I didn't have a slot on the form for it. She said she dug a little further. Back in the late 90s, the 911 center took a hang-up from that address. It wasn't a landline then either, because that line had already been disconnected. The record on paper said, open line, faint whisper, no contact, units cleared. She laughed when she told me, not because she thought it was funny, but because what else do you do? Some nights, I keep the radio just a little louder around mile marker 14. I don't do it because I'm scared. I do it because there are gaps between the calls. You think you know the sound of an empty house until it calls you first. Story number 2. Nights on response in my patch of the Midlands have a rhythm you learn to trust. The pub's empty around 11, the kebab shop queue thins by 1:30, and by 1 in the morning the estate cats own the pavements. Then the calls change. You get the domestic arguments that never quite decide what they are. The suspicious vehicles that turn out to be a builder sleeping off a long week in his van. The odd alarm that stutters because a spider found a warm sensor. What you don't expect is a call that shouldn't exist on a line that shouldn't be there. Control put it out at 1:47. All units. Silent 999 from Harrier Court. Block 3. Silent solution activated. Caller pressed 5 to 5. No voice. AML shows accuracy radius 8 meters. Level unknown. Any unit free to attend immediate? I was 2 streets over, coming off the ring road and letting the heater fight the mist that loves our town after midnight. Papa 2-1. Show me going, I said. And my colleague Ellis, riding with me, was already pulling the AZ map closer, even though we both knew Harrier Court by smell and sound. It's a 1,972nd slab of a place. 3 blocks of flats above a parade of shuttered shops, a barber with a bucket under a leak, a charity shop you could get lost in if you like old wool, and a Polish deli that always smells like smoked meat, even when the lights are out. Control came back. Received 2-1. Event number is 1273. Silent solution 5-5 received at 0146. Open line for 23 seconds. Background consistent with low mechanical hum. No voice. AML places caller within the lobby area of Block 3. No prior calls tonight. Key holder for the block is Housing Association. Caretaker on-call number, logged. We said we'd take it, and I could feel Ellis shift from shoulder relaxed to forward ready. He's not jumpy, just present. He's ex-military and likes steps in order, and there's something about a 999 silent call that makes everyone straighten. For the uninitiated, if you ring 999 and can't speak, there's a system that asks you to press 55 to confirm you're in danger but can't talk. It's supposed to separate pocket dials from the ones that matter. The thing is, sometimes you get a press, but the rest of the story never arrives. We pulled up in the lay-by that doubles as the drop-off for the flats and the loading for the shops. My headlights washed over the metal shutters and made the graffiti blink. Above us, Block 3 rose 6 floors, every third window yellow with old bulbs. The communal door to the lobby was a heavy thing that favored one hinge, with a cracked pane taped over like a band-aid. The PIR sensor light above it buzzed and then came on, then off, then on again, indecisive in that British way even a light can have. Control, 2-1, show us on scene, I said, stepping out, breath puffing in the damp. Received, 2-1, be advised. Caller's line reconnected at 0150. Again, silent solution accepted. 5-5 pressed. No speech. Open line for 5 seconds. Background hum again. Same AML radius. We've dialed back twice. No answer. I nodded, like she could see it, and Ellis glanced at me. Lift? He said quietly, not guessing so much as narrowing. Sounds like it, I admitted. Lifts hum, even when they're doing nothing. It's a sound you start to notice because it's always there in blocks like this, like an old fridge sleeping. We went to the communal door. The intercom panel was a museum of failed repairs, plastic buttons shiny where fingers had begged entry for years, half the flat numbers scribbled on masking tape. Someone had attempted to replace the door closer. It had a spring strong enough to wrestle, which is probably why the latch never met the striker plate cleanly. I tried the handle. It gave. The door had been left on the catch, which made me unhappy for reasons beyond the obvious. You don't want randoms drifting into lobbies at 2 in the morning. But it also meant whoever had been down there had options. We stepped into that familiar smell. Wet concrete, old chip fat from below, and that cold note lifts have like nickels and oil. The lobby was small and square with the lift bank to the left and the stairwell to the right, both painted a color that was once cheerful and was now the shade of paperwork you meant to file. There was a notice board with a dozen copies of the same laminated warning, "Do not prop the fire door." Above that, a list of the caretaker's hours and an emergency number that always rings a man who sounds like he hasn't slept since the Olympics. The lift doors were brushed steel gone dull. 2 lifts, side by side. Lift A had a paper sign, out of order. Lift B had no sign, but the call button didn't light when I pressed it. No whir from above, no relay click. Dead. Ellis took his torch and angled it at the small gap where the 2 doors met. You can sometimes see the shadow of the car if it's sitting at your level. It was a darkness that looked like more hallway in a place with no lights. I pressed my ear to the seam, feeling stupid and knowing I was going to do it anyway. There was a hum. Yes, faint, but not live. More the building's breath than the lifts. Whoever called us, if you can hear me, hello. This is the police. Press the call button in the lift if you're stuck, I said, raising my voice enough to cut any echo. It bounced around the tile and came back thinner. You feel foolish when you talk to an empty room. You do it anyway. Control broke in again, her voice flatter than usual, like she'd rested her chin in her hand. 2-1. The line connected again. Very brief. We're getting a tone pattern. DTMF. That's the tone when someone presses a key. We had 1. And then 5 to 5 again. No voice. Did you announce? Just did, I said. We're at the lift bank. No power to the call lights. Received. I'll ring the caretaker to attend with keys. We went methodically. Stairwell first. Empty. A smell of cigarettes and cleaning fluid that never quite wins. We called up through its hollow. Police. If you're there, call out. A window somewhere 3 floors up. Rattled politely. And then stopped. On the first landing, someone had left a pram folded against the wall. On the second, a trainer without its pair. On the third, Ellis pointed with his chin at a faint trail of something on the concrete like crumbs of plaster, leading toward the lift doors on that level, then ending where someone had half-heartedly swept. Down in the lobby again, we stood in front of the lift phones. Each lift car has an emergency intercom. You press the button inside the car, it dials an alarm center that then rings through to control if nobody answers. The little grills on the panels looked back at us like small mouths. On our side of the doors, there were only the call buttons. I thumbed Lift A again, even though the sign scolded. The button didn't light, but from somewhere not exactly above us, I heard a single, lonely click, like a relay changing its mind, and then changing it back. Did you hear? Ellis started, and then the outer door to the lobby groaned, and a breeze carried a smell of rain and kebab wrapper in. The caretaker's key scraped, the handle squealed, and in came Paul, the man behind the emergency number, hair a conspiracy against gravity, high vis over his jumper, ring of keys like a medieval jailer. Saw you on the camera, he said, a little wide-eyed but in good humor. You all right? What we got? Silent 999 from this block, I said. Press 55. No voice. AML puts the caller in here. In here? He looked around as if the room might explain itself. He glanced up at the dome camera in the corner, then at the lift doors. Lifts? Dead, he said, a certainty. Been off for a fortnight. Company's waiting on a part. I've got notices up. We know, I said, nodding at the paper sign. But control's hearing background hum. DTMF tones. Sounds like a button press. He frowned. Alarm line for Lift B is cut. We had a leak in the riser last month. BT came out and blanked the pair. Lift A's line was out long before that. I can show you. He sounded proud in that way caretakers do when they've memorized the building's skeleton. We asked for the machine room. He took us through a door that pretended to be for staff only, and led down to a low ceiling and an industrial smell, past meters with blue seals and a cupboard that read bin store in black stencils, but was clearly a graveyard for old mops. The lift motor room was a box of rumbling that wasn't rumbling. Everything had been turned off at the isolator. The big gray cabinets that usually hum like bees were silent as a church on a Tuesday. The emergency phone box on the wall where the line comes into the building before feeding the cars had its faceplate open and the cable pairs taped with labels. On 2 pairs, the copper had been cut clean and capped. See? Paul said, satisfaction and worry wrestling in his voice. No line. The alarm company was going to reroute when the part came. Ellis and I looked at each other. You get used to the shape of your own uncertain face in moments like that. Control's voice came small through my earpiece. 2, 1, line open again. 5, 5 again. Background hum. And I think I can hear a tapping, like keys on a lanyard against a panel. No voice. I let the silence in the motor room sink into my bones. No hum, no line, and yet a hum on a line somewhere. The problem with doing this job long enough is that when something doesn't add up, you have a million sensible boxes to sort it into. Fault, delay, crossed wires in a network far away. And when you've checked them, the leftover bit sits in your hand. Can we open the doors at ground level? I asked Paul, just to check the car. He didn't love it. You could see the calculation of paperwork pass over his face. Then he nodded, and went to get the manual key and the long hook that lives in a corner of the motor room for when engineers do their magic. Back in the lobby, he fitted the unlock key into the small socket beside Lift B's doors. It turned with a mechanical truth you can hear in your teeth. The doors guillotined apart a few inches, then more, with the slow grace of something made to move only when the world agrees. The car was not at our level. We were looking into the lift shaft, a rectangle of black that drank our torch beams. Right, Paul said. So it's not at ground. What level is it at? Ellis asked. Could be between, Paul said, peering like a tourist into a cave. If the power cut out mid-journey, it'll have stopped wherever it was, and then when it's powered back up, it's supposed to glide to the closest landing. But it's dead. So it stayed where it died. Control broke in again, both curious and careful. 2. 1. The AML just updated. Accuracy now 2 meters. It's putting the caller on your level, near the lift bank. Ellis and I stood very still. Our own footprints were damp on the council specification mat by the door. There were 3 takeaway menus on the floor, curled into waves. Somewhere 6 seconds away, a late lorry growled over the bridge. Everything else was as we'd left it. Okay, I said, mostly to the room. If you can hear me, if you called us, just bang on the door. Press the lift alarm button if you can reach it. We waited. I heard our breathing. I heard the fluorescent tube above the notice board think about starting and then change its mind. I heard my own blood. Then, muffled, and where it shouldn't have been, came 3 quick taps on metal. The crisp, hollow kind that travels through panels. Ellis's torch snapped to the lift doors. The taps had sounded like they came from inside the shaft, a fraction too high for the car to be at ground. He looked at me. I looked at Paul. Paul swallowed. That'd be level 2, he said, voice steady because mine and Ellis's were trying to be. If it's up a bit, we can try the doors there. We ran the stairs rather than wait for a lift that wasn't coming. On level 2, the paint peel looked like a map of somewhere better. Paul fit the key again, and we went through the same slow motion with the doors. They opened to reveal the car. Lift B, lidless, dull, steel and mirror panel that had seen more faces than a stadium. The car sat half an inch lower than the landing. The gap was a dark smile. The lights inside were off. The emergency intercom panel in the car was a metal plate with 4 screws and nothing behind it. The alarm button was a placeholder circle where a button used to be. There was no intercom. There was nowhere to press. I stepped in. The smell was dust and the ghost of oil. Police, I said into a box that wasn't there. If you rang, we're here. Are you injured? I listened to the dead panel. The mirror looked back at me with that slight fisheye that makes everyone seem a little more tired, a little more lost. I turned in the car, looked up at the ceiling. The trap door was closed, the screws intact. Ellis rapped a knuckle on the wall. It answered like a tuning fork, metal on metal, and then quiet again. No one answered with a voice. That should have been the end of it. The story where the call was a glitch and we checked, and the world went back to its rails. Control came soft. 2. 1. Line has just dropped entirely. We have a callback attempt from our side. No ringtone. We're logging it as misroute. Unless you have anything. I looked at Ellis. He looked at me. We had a car with no intercom generating button presses and hums on a dead line. We had taps like knuckles, and nothing behind them. And we had a building that had heard this before. You can feel it in the way a room waits for the next bit of a story. We cleared the flats anyway. It would have been rude not to. We knocked on the doors nearest the lift and got 2 bleary faces who resented us in that harmless domestic way. Heard anything? We asked. One woman shook her head. The other thought and then said, saw the light in the lobby flick on and off a few times. We talked to her a bit longer, because sometimes that's what a night is, gently convincing people nothing is happening. By the time we came back down, the PIR had decided to work properly. The lift doors were closed again. Paul locked them with the certainty of a man who would very much like to hand the night back to us. We took details, time, names, the bits you can fix to a report. We logged an intel message to the Housing Association's asset team to ask for the lift alarm lines to be checked. We thanked Paul, who looked smaller for a second in the big bright of the lobby. Then he straightened and became the caretaker again. We cleared with Control. In the car, Ellis leaned his head back and blew out a breath. "Ghost in the machine," he said, aiming for light. I grunted. He looked at me and smiled with half his face. "Not buying that one? I'll buy a crossed line from a nearby building," I said. "I'll buy the AML being confused in a small space, lots of concrete reflections. I'll buy an engineer's test call left in a loop. I'll buy a key ring on a panel somewhere far away that sounds like here because we wanted it to. I'll buy all of that. And the taps? Settling," I said. "Metal shifts as it cools. We left it there because if you push, you start building an answer you like rather than the one that's there." 2 days later, the CAD note updated. Control had spoken to the alarm company. They had no record of any inbound calls for that time from Harrier Court's number because Harrier Court had no number on their board because the lines were, by their chart, capped and dead. BT's engineer confirmed the same. The pairs we'd seen cut in the motor room had indeed been blanked at the exchange. No calls could originate from that circuit. Control's supervisor used the words, "It's not possible," in an email like it was punctuation. A week after that, Paul rang our station. He's not supposed to have our direct line, but caretakers collect numbers the way pigeons collect chips. "You're the ones came to the lift, yeah?" he said, not waiting for the answer. "Listen, the engineers were here today. Got it all powered again. Lines too. But I'm ringing because of last night. I was doing a walkthrough. 11:30. It was quiet. You know, you can hear your own boots. I got into the lobby of Block 3 and the lift button lit up, on its own. Not the ring you press, just the light. It stayed on, and there was no power to the cabin light. I thought I'd imagined it, but then the dome camera picked it up as well. The engineer showed me this morning. It's in the recording. It's just a little glow, but it's there. Then it went off. I told myself it was a power surge. It probably was. Anyway, thought you'd like to know. I didn't like to know. I wanted to put the story away. But if you do nights, you get used to the idea that sometimes the story keeps itself. That would be the end, except it wasn't quite. A month later, I was on a late turn covering the town center when Control sang to life with a tone we don't hear often. A recall on an old event number. "All units be advised, we have a repeat caller event tied to 1273. It's Harrier Court, Block 3, 999, silent solution received. 5-5 pressed. This time we have a whisper. Can't make it out. I was 2 streets over again, because my life is a loop. 2, 1, en route. When we turned into the lay-by, the shutter to the deli was half up. The owner was inside, cleaning, music low, lights orange. The lobby PIR flicked on before we even reached it. The lift buttons glowed normal. We stood in the same square, smelled the same smells, and said the same thing we'd said before. "Police. If you called us, we're here." Control said, "We can hear you on the line." "Where's it coming from?" I asked. "We're seeing it terminate to an old trunk number for the block," she said. "It's listed as Lift 2, but the number is, I'm going to say, retired." "How retired?" 1998, she said, paper turning in the background, as if she was checking the age of a ghost. "I don't have a neat ending. We didn't rescue anyone from a stuck box. We didn't find a phone stuffed in a ceiling tile. We didn't chase a teenager who thought it was funny to ring us and watch. I wrote a report that reads dry because the world expects paperwork to make sense. We did a welfare sweep on every floor because it would have been wrong not to. A man on level 5 thanked us for waking him because he had to be up at 4. A woman on level 1 told us there had been a phone in the lobby back when her daughter was little, the red sort, and that it rang all the time, and you were supposed to leave it alone. She smiled when she said it, like she told me a fairy tale. Some things settle into your routine. Now, when I pass Harrier Court on nights, I listen without knowing I'm listening. The lift hum is back, a steady bee behind the wall. When the PIR clicks on as I walk by, I watch to see if the lift buttons light themselves, and most nights they do not. The difference between most nights and all nights is where the cold edge lives. Ellis says it's engineering. The caretaker says it's because lifts remember who they carry. Control says the network does odd things when it's raining. I say there was a call, and 10 minutes later there was a click on a line that never came into the room we stood in. All I can tell you for sure is that on our CAD, event 1273 is marked NFA no further action, but whenever the phone on a desk under 3 floors of old concrete sings that tone, and control says, silent solution, 5 to 5, I feel the lift doors in my teeth again, and I find myself pressing my tongue to a molar like there's a coin caught there I need to bring out into the light. Story number 3. When you work nights up here, you start measuring the world in breath. How it feels in your scarf. How it fogs your visor. How fast it turns to ice on your mustache when you step out of the truck at -28. The detachment sits on the edge of town, a square of light and a lot of darkness, and the highway slides past it like a river pretending to be a road. When it's that cold, even the semis move quiet. The North chooses your pace. You respect it or it reminds you. I'm a constable posted to a small RCMP detachment in the Boreal. Our call area is a lot of lines on a map and not a lot of people. You get your domestics, your moose where a moose shouldn't be, your fuel thefts, and your wellness checks that turn into kettle on the stove rescues. Stuff you can put in a report and feel like you put your hands around. And then you get the ones that don't sit neatly under a heading. Our 911 night started at 1-6, with what the communications center called an open line on a no-service handset. That's their wording. When someone dials from a phone that can only make emergency calls. It plotted, according to their Phase 2, somewhere off Range Road 113 north of Township 720. If you don't speak in grids, that puts you on the edge of a long, straight seismic cut line, the kind of swath through black spruce that looks like someone laid a ruler on the land and decided walking should be possible. North comms to 3 Charlie 2, the dispatcher said, her voice warm in the cab, because I keep volume higher in the night cold. We've got a 911 open, no voice. Prototype location rebid shows handset within 65 meters of Range Road 113 at 720. Call is from a deactivated device. No callback possible. Any units to attend? I was cruising the town grid just to keep the engine honest. My partner that night was Martel, 2 years out of depot. A prairie kid who carries a thermos like a lifeline. 3 Charlie 2, copy, en route, I said, flicking the wheel into a half U-turn and letting the truck's back end settle where the snowpack allowed. Advise last ping if it updates. Copy. Will rebid every 30 seconds. Current accuracy is 58 meters. No background noise, just open carrier. Martel gave me a look over his collar. No? Service handset? He asked. He knows the terms now. The way you learn a new town's side roads. Trying to make a map in your head that looks like sense. Means a phone that's not active can still dial 911, I said, watching the highway shoulder snow whipping in little ghosts under the streetlights. No SIM, no plan, but it can scream if it has to. He nodded, and we both watched our breaths for a second like we could learn something from them. Past the last gas bar with the Tims inside, the highway turns dark fast. The stars come down until you feel like your roof isn't a roof anymore. I turned off at 720 and rolled the unit into 4 high, because the county hadn't been back out since late afternoon. The range road was a narrow tunnel between trees, our light hitting trunks and trunk shadows like a metronome. The thermometer on the dash glowed -29°C, but you knew it was colder where the wind did what it wanted. North comms to 3 Charlie 2. Control came again. Rebid puts it 90 meters north of the intersection now. Accuracy 41 meters. Background is... She paused. It's like wind across a microphone. No voice. Still an open line. We slowed and let the truck crawl. A cut line intersects the grid like a scar. You can miss it if your mind's somewhere else. It appeared between stands of black spruce like a green tunnel that had forgotten summer. In winter, it's a service road for the invisible. Snowmobile tracks, occasional oil field pickups, deer stepping tentatively, and nothing that moves when you are looking. I nosed the truck in and killed the high beams to let my eyes adjust. The cut line ran straight as a drawn breath. Waist-high drifts filled the lee side. The other side was scoured down to a crust that squealed under boots. No new vehicle tracks, no human prints. Just an old sled trail that looked at least a day gone. We shut off the engine. Silence isn't silence out there. It's Tree Creek. and the far hiss of the highway, and the tiny pop of ice crystals adjusting on branches. We stood with our backs to the truck and the lights washing the first 20 meters with white. RCMP, I called, letting my voice carry clean and even. 911. If you can hear me, call back, call out, wave a light. Comms keyed up again. The timing wrong in that way that makes your jaw tense. 3 Charlie 2. Rebid puts the handset within 30 meters of your position. Stationary. Accuracy 22 meters. Still open. Still wind. Copy, I said. We both let our eyes and ears work. You can hear something out here because there isn't much to compete. The wind was present, but soft. The cold was its own presence. Let's walk to the first bend, Martel said. It wasn't really a bend, just where the cut line dips for a muskeg run and the trees lower their shoulders. We clicked on our headlamps, slung our rifles in the way you sling a thing you don't want to need, and started into the crunch. Our boot prints showed dark under the headlamp beam for a second before the frost reclaimed them into the flat. 30 meters, 22 meters accuracy, on a line you could measure with a lint roller, and there was nothing to see. We moved slow, pausing every 5 paces to listen. The forest does a trick at those temperatures. Sound travels like it's been thinking about arriving for days. Somewhere to our right, a fox barked twice like a laugh. Somewhere behind us, the truck creaked as it cooled. North comms, I said, keying my shoulder mic with my glove and listening to my own breath in the hood's echo. 3 Charlie 2. Do you still have that line? Affirm, she said. Still open. It's the same. There's a faint tap now and then. Could be handling noise. There's no speech. The handset moved 5 meters north on the last bid, then back. Copy. We are on foot, 30 meters in. See if you can get another rebid. We took 10 more steps. My lamp picked up a small depression ahead. Not a footprint. A perfect, clean round. Like a heel, but too small. Then another, spaced irregularly and slightly to the right. I knelt and touched the edge with a gloved finger. It was the kind of mark a spruce cone makes when it falls and punches into snow, and then the snow glazes around it. But there were no cones on the surface. Not here. In the beam's edge, the frost drifted like smoke when I breathed. Martel, I said, pointing. Cones? He said. Maybe, I said. We looked up into the black combs of the branches and saw nothing loosening, nothing falling. We listened so hard the blood in our ears got loud and then quiet again. Comms keyed up. 3 Charlie 2. The handset just moved 14 meters north. Accuracy, 31 meters. It's moving slowly, like walking. I know that's not a technical term, but that's the speed. We looked at each other, and then at the line ahead where our lights fell away into a clean white distance and the hint of a dip. We still saw no prints. We still heard nothing more than the world being itself. There's a point where training and experience both agree. You acknowledge the weird, you don't let it drive. We walked. At the first low point, the cut line drops into a frozen muskeg that doesn't freeze all the way. It looks like a field until it refuses to hold you. We stopped at the edge and worked the lamp along the surface. You can read a lot in the way snow sits if you've got winters in your knees. No drag lines, no press marks. No one had gone through on foot, sled, or truck since the last bit of weather had evened it. There were little islands of willow stems, the tops frosted like sugar sticks. The world breathed and then held it. Comms again. 3 Charlie 2. Handset is now in the muskeg, 25 meters ahead of you. Accuracy 25 meters. Still open line. We're hearing another sound now. It's hard to describe. Like plastic creaking. Close to a mic. Could just be your radio. You're not getting our vehicle or our voices? I asked. Negative. We can hear your radio when you key, but the open line is a separate audio. There's the wind and the creaking and a faint beep. One tone. Every 30 seconds. It's not a sound I recognize. Martel gave me a look that said he didn't like any of that. I didn't either. But we were already here. I checked the temp again because your brain likes numbers when clouds don't give you edges. -29. The muskeg in front of us looked firm, but you don't trust your eyes. We circled to the right, staying on the dress of the cut line where the base was packed from seasons of traffic. We found a line where a snowshoe had gone through maybe 2 days earlier deep prints, the tail drag feathering like frayed rope. They stopped before the muskeg, as if someone checked it and decided to try again later. Beyond that, nothing. No hare, no fox, no vole scribble, just the disciplined surface of cold. Somewhere in there, my shoulder mic did a thing I've only heard twice. It caught a half-second of our own transmission on a delay. A little ghost of our previous words stepping on ours. It happens when terrain and towers argue, but the voice that blipped through was mine from maybe 20 seconds earlier, half a phrase we walked and then gone. I clicked the volume down a notch and told my brain to put it in the network box, and not the one labeled, "Don't think about it later." 3, Charlie 2, comm said, quieter. There's a tone dispatchers get when they're leaning closer to their screen even though they know it won't change the picture. The handset just moved 20 meters south toward you, then stopped. Accuracy 22. The tone we heard just beeped twice, closer together. We held there like figures in a snow globe someone wasn't quite done shaking. I can tell you what I felt physically. Cold crawling up from my boots, the weight of my jacket on my shoulders, the precise ache of the truck keys pressing my thigh in my pocket, the dryness of air so sharp it felt like it could score glass. I can tell you what I didn't feel. Company. We backed out and worked a different angle. Sometimes your eyes don't cooperate until you trick them with new lines. We tried the far side of the cut line and came at the muskeg from the east. The same smooth crust blinked back. We stopped again. I called out again. RCMP, if you called 911 and you can hear me, call out, wave a light, hit your phone again. My voice went out and came back like it had been asked to put a scarf over its face. Comms. 3 Charlie 2. The open line just clicked. Sorry. Give me a second. You could hear her take a breath, like she was aware of doing it. We just got a WPH2 rebid with an IMEI attached. That's the device identifier the carriers can sometimes see. It's old. Okay, we're checking. The handset shows as a Motorola Flip, last active on a network 8 years ago. We're trying to get a registered owner. It may not be possible. I looked at Martel and saw him do the math of 8 winters on that line. A sledder, a hunter, someone who had lost a phone and never wanted to talk about it. The idea felt like something I didn't want to hold too tightly under that sky. We were out long enough to make my eyelashes stick. At some point, the open line dropped, the way a tired person drops a conversation. Comms told us they tried to ring back, and the network refused because there was nothing to ring. We marked it on our GPS. We pushed as far up the line as felt reasonable without extra bodies and skis, and we went back to the truck because you don't pick fights with muskeg at 2 in the morning in those temperatures unless you're already losing one. We warmed our fingers under the vents. Steam lifted off our jackets. We let the windshield clear and the night come back into focus through it. We called comms and did the dance of decisions that cops do in places where reality is big and men are small. We asked for a tow company on standby in case we decided to use their tracked unit. We asked for the on-call SAR contact to be woken but not engaged. We wrote in our notebooks with ballpoints that skated over the page because ink gets nervous in those temperatures. Comms to 3 Charlie 2, she said a few minutes later. We have a name associated to that IMEI from old records. It's not a subscriber name, just a contact from a previous call. A spouse. We can give you the number. We took it and sat there looking at the digits like they were a puzzle we were supposed to know how to do. I put the truck in drive and rolled the short distance back to the highway so we could get a bar of service on our work phone that wasn't flirting with the idea of not working. I dialed. It rang 3 times, and an older woman answered with the guarded hello of someone who doesn't want to be told anything new late at night. I introduced myself, said why I was calling, said the words carefully so their shapes couldn't cut. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He lost that phone on a line near Wolf Creek, 8 years ago. He came home without it. He was embarrassed. He said it was gone somewhere in the snow, and when the melt came, we looked, but it was never found." She said the name of her husband, and then didn't say another word for a few breaths. "He's here," she added finally, like she'd been trying to decide whether to offer the next truth. "He's sleeping in his chair. He's fine. We live in town now. He doesn't go that far anymore." She laughed, and it made a small sound, like a lid placed gently back on a jar. We never canceled that old account. We didn't know how. I thanked her. I said we were going to go back out later with daylight and take another look. She thanked me in that way people do when you're a stranger on the phone with a badge and a connection to some small part of their history. Back at the cut line, the world did what it had been doing for hours, existed without us. We sat a few minutes more with the truck idling and the wind testing the small plastic bits on the outside corners. Then comms called again and told us the line had come back for 5 seconds and dropped. No location, no audio. Just enough to feel like a small hand had brushed a cuff and then not done it again. We wrote it up as far as paperwork lets you write anything up. 911 open line, deactivated handset, 911 rebids, no visual, no voice contact, unable to locate. We'll follow up. All true. None of it a story you could tell to a family or a jury. At first light, with the sun pretending it wanted to try that day, we came back with a sled and a pair of snowshoes we keep illegal amounts of patience for. We worked the margins of the muskeg. We staked the furthest ping coordinates and made circles out from them, walking them like you walk a lost thing until your tracks make a diagram of your hope. We found a scrap of blue plastic half buried under wind polish, looked like a corner of a phone battery cover from a decade ago. It could have been anything from anywhere, on any line. We bagged it because detachment life makes magpies of us. Possible phone back? I wrote on the label. Found at 55. 416. We pushed another 50 meters. The ice sounded like a drum under our heels, and we turned around because the world doesn't care about your curiosity. Later that day, the comm supervisor sent an email in that careful tone that wants to be helpful without promising more than physics will deliver. The vendor had told her no service devices can still call 911 when they manage to handshake with any tower, but the system doesn't log much beyond an unknown. The old IMEI was probably populated by a database that had been carrying its ghost longer than it had any right. We cannot confirm the device identity, she wrote. We can confirm a call. It read like someone had wiped their hands and then looked when their palms still felt sticky. 2 weeks later, on an evening when the snow had that wet weight it gets before the cold burns the moisture out and turns it crystal hard again, we got another 911 open line from the same general area. This time the rebids walked along a different piece of cut line and then stopped half a kilometer short of a trapper's cabin everyone knows and nobody disturbs. We went out and we did the whole thing again. Lights, breath, calls into the dark. We saw a new set of snowshoe prints and a fox's tidy little hems. We saw a crow hopscotching behind something we couldn't see and didn't need to. We heard our radio cough once and then clear itself. Comm said the audio on their end had the same wind, the same single tone every half minute. Could be a low battery warning, she said, as if she needed to provide an answer even if it felt thin. Or could be the network. We never found a person to take ownership of the sound. The man whose number lived beside that old IMEI came into the detachment on a Tuesday to bring us muffins his wife had baked. He was older than me by a decade and had a quiet that made you want to speak softer. He told me he had in fact lost his phone on a line once, and he had in fact been embarrassed, and he had in fact, I thought about it a lot that winter, because losing things in the north feels like gifting them to the place. Maybe it wanted to call home one more time, he said, smiling in a way that asked me not to make fun of him. I didn't. He looked at the plastic bit we'd bagged and said it wasn't from his model. Then he asked us if we could sign a form for the Range Road cleanup volunteers. We did, and his shoulders settled like something had been put down or picked up. It was hard to tell. There's a line I could draw around the part of the map where the calls appear, if I let myself. It would be a neat rectangle of observation. The rational part of me says that rectangle would overlay patchy cell coverage, odd tower handoffs, weird multipath reflections off ice and tree trunks, weather-bending radio in ways that make engineers feel smart. The less rational part of me, the part that knows the sound of my own breath better than some men know their own names, says sometimes a thing is just exactly how it presents. A call for help from a place that doesn't like to be looked at. You go, and you look, and the place looks back, without telling you anything new. We've changed how we handle those open lines now. We still go. We bring skis if the cold is cruel. We don't bring stories we haven't earned. We don't stand out there any longer than the place allows. And when we come back to the detachment and the heater ticks in its own language, we pour coffee from a pot that went too long, and we sit under the humming fluorescent lights, and we write words that feel like they should weigh more than they do. Then we clip the keys back on the hook and we go out again because that's the rhythm and the job and the way the North keeps time. Every so often, comms will come on the air with that particular hush in her voice and say, 3 Charlie 2, we've got another open line. No, service handset, possible on the cut line. And my shoulders will go a little tight, not with fear, but with the knowledge I'm going to be measuring the world with my breath again for a while. We'll drive out there, and the road will be narrower than I remember, and the stars will sit lower, and the cut line will look like a sentence the land started and then forgot how to finish. And we'll stand in it, and we'll listen, and we'll hear the wind across a microphone a long way from any mouth. Story number 4. Night shift on the coast has its own soundtrack. It isn't sirens or shouting. It's halyards knocking against masts, the slap of little black waves, against timber piles, the hiss of a sou'easter creeping under the roller door at the back of the station. We're a small district, one main street that quiets by 10, one pub that doesn't, a boat ramp that's always got at least one ute back too far down it, and a jetty that runs into the bay like somebody underlined the water with a ruler. On paper, a sleepy patch. On nights, you learn what the water keeps. It was just after 2 when comms called it. Unit 5 to 2, 000 silent call. Telco operator has passed through. No voice. Key press detected. Originating service shows as public payphone at the old ferry wharf. Her voice had that careful brightness you develop when you know you're about to make someone else get out of a warm vehicle. 5, 2, copy, I said. Ash was with me, 6 months out of the academy, and still sitting too straight. I turned us off the highway towards the headland, tires thumping over the piano keys before the bridge. The bridge is the thing that made the ferry wharf an old story. 5 years ago, they cut a ribbon, and everybody cheered, and the ferry crew took jobs somewhere else. The wharf stayed because no one can agree on what to do with history. Comms added. Operator asked them to cough or press a key. She heard a single beep, then nothing. Call dropped at 2:03. Telstra's ID on the line shows that specific payphone. We've got a number. I've checked the directory, it's listed as decommissioned. Ash raised his eyebrows under his beanie. How's a decommissioned phone make a call? He asked the dashboard. Good question, I said, and let the engine do the rest of the talking. We angled into the car park by the boat ramp. The floodlights along the jetty were on, which they shouldn't have been. Council's timer is meant to keep the place dark between midnight and 5, unless someone trips the PIRs. The chain across the ramp glowed with frost and a cable tie that had been snapped by someone who needed the ramp more than regulation. The air smelled like kelp and diesel. Far out, a marker light blinked red, steady and patient. Comms, 5 to 2 on scene, I said, stepping out. The cold found my ears in one breath. Ash pulled his jacket up. The wind had that oily feel it gets when it's been over water for a long time. Copy 5 to 2. Be advised, second contact just now. Same originating number. 3 seconds. Sound of wind and what might be gulls. Operator prompted. No response. Line dropped. Gulls. I glanced up. The floodlights were pulling in bait shop moths and 3 lazy gulls who had decided a municipal pole was close enough to a cliff for their purposes. They eyed us the way gulls eye everything, like it might be edible if it stopped moving. We walked the first stretch of the jetty. The boards shone dark, slick with night. My boots knew which ones gave a bit, and which ones felt like they had a grudge. The sign at the entrance, put up back when the ferry was a thing, still read, warning, slippery when wet. Under that, a faded sticker. Report incidents to 000. The metal pole, where the payphone used to be concrete plinth with 4 bolt holes, sat to the left just inside the gate. A rectangle of cleaner paint on the fence marked where someone had taken down the old Telstra placard. If you stood on the plinth and closed your eyes, you could almost place the weight of a handset in your hand, the coiled cord tired of its own shape. I didn't. Anyone here? I called, and my voice went out along the timber and came back polite. Police. You called 000, can you wave? Call out? Ash did the same because his training is new enough to still sound like training. Halfway down the jetty is a little shelter with a tin roof that leaks out of loyalty. A bench bolted to the deck. A light that flickers when it's bored. The bridge loomed to our right, its new concrete trying to pretend it had always been part of the bay. Beyond that, the dark bulk of the headland, radio tower lights like red eyes closing and opening slow. "Comms," I said. "Confirm no callback number?" "Affirmative. Payphones don't provide return path. Operator has no way to ring back. She's checking with Telstra. Also stand by." 10 seconds of quiet except for the gentle, stupid clank of rigging and the fizz of the floodlight ballast. 5, 2. The Telstra line tech on call says that payphone cabinet was ripped out 6 months ago. Line physically cut at the pit behind the fish co-op. There shouldn't be a call on that ID. I stood still long enough for the wind to decide it wanted to push me and then not. "Copy," I said, because there's never a better word when your ears are trying to write their own story. At the end of the jetty, the old ferry pole still stands with its rusted pulley and chain. I put a glove to the timber and felt the cold come through like a coin. Below, the water slid and slapped and breathed. Somewhere under that sound was another one, a metal-on-metal rattle that could have been the chain complaining, or a dinghy bumping, or a memory getting the details wrong. Ash pointed with his chin at the far end of the ferry ramp, where the old gates still live, chained and padlocked. The no ascesis sign faded to ghost letters. "You want to check the ramp?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. And we stepped down the timbers onto the concrete slope where the ferry used to drop its belly. The weed on it held the cold, like a secret. On the left, a ladder disappeared under the water with a careful, unhurried logic. The ladder made a noise when the tide moved slow. That might have been what I'd heard. Might. "Police!" Ash called again. And it was the kind of call you only make when you know you can't really expect an answer, and you're not sure you want one. Comms came in my ear, soft and level. 5, 2. We've got a third contact. This time the operator reports a very faint voice. Male. Possibly saying hello. Or help. Hard to tell. There's a tonal blip on the line every 30 seconds, consistent with keypad beep or battery warning. Again, the originating service is the Ferry Wharf payphone. Time now, 2:15. I looked at the concrete plinth, where the phone had Saturday frost had grown a beard on the bolts. I looked at the bench and the little shelter that made conversations in other years. I looked at the water ball pattern a boat makes even when it's not there, and felt stupid for thinking the water would give me one. The SES Captain Gaz pulled in while we were still on the jetty. He drives an old Hilux that always looks like it recently saw more mud than the coast can provide. He waved like he'd been asleep and didn't mind it. "You lads chasing ghosts?" he said. Cheery because he's the kind of man who refuses to be dragged into anyone else's weather. "Maybe," I said. "Telstra has this payphone calling, only it's not here anymore." He nodded the way people do when they've got a story that matches yours. "Mate," the kiosk fella says, "sometimes his landline rings at 2 in the morning, months, nothing at the other end, just gulls. Sometimes it rings twice. It's always after a sou'easter and before the tide turns. He reckons it's the number from the ferry office that doesn't exist anymore." Me, I reckon Telstra gets bored. Ash grinned because he likes Gaz. I don't mind him either. He leaned on the fence and peered out at the dark like it owed him money. "You want marine rescue?" he asked. "If we had a voice or a light, yeah," I said. "Right now we've got a phone number that doesn't exist." We stood a while and did the job's most important part, listening. The bit you don't learn well until you've missed something once and gone home angry at yourself for the shape of the night. Somewhere to our left, under the bridge, a fish jumped the way fish do when they want it understood that they're still in charge. The wind made the same word over and over through the railings. "Comms," I said. "Any update from Telstra?" "Affirm," she said. "Their supervisor has pulled the exchange logs. That number should be dead, but the switch accepted the call route. They're saying it could be undocumented behavior with an old line card and a load on the trunk. I'm not translating that for you because I can't. They're sending a tech out in the morning." "That's great," I said, and meant it more than it sounded. "Theories you can fit in a sentence soothe." Then she added, "We also had a call into 000 at 2:01 from a mobile near the bridge with poor connection. Operator heard a voice say, 'Operator,' and then the line died. That number doesn't accept callbacks either. Prepaid. No voicemail." "Copy," I said, and felt my shoulders do the small drop they do when too many threads tangle at once. "We'll be here another 10. We did another lap, checked the gaps, shone our lights under the deck in case someone was holding onto a beam like this was still the old dock, and they had a place to be brave. Nothing but barnacle shadows and the odd flash of something silver that wanted to pretend it was the moon. Gaz made a noise in his throat. "Hear that?" he asked. I held still. The jets of the halyard pinging stopped, and then the void filled itself. There it was, a ring. Not a digital tone. Not the chirp of a mobile. A proper old bell. 2 notes, slightly out of tune with each other. Once, twice, then silence. It came from the general location of the shelter. Or the plinth. Or the memory of a phone. It was thin, like sound pegged, to cold. And it could have been any number of things a body will insist are familiar because that's what bodies do. Ash looked at me with his eyes a little bigger in his face. I looked at the plinth again. The frost on it had caught a bit of light and made a line like a number 7. Your brain will eat itself if you feed it nothing but coincidence for too long. "Comms," I said. "Confirm last time of the last ring. 2:17 and 25 seconds, she said. "Why?" "Just curious," I said. Gaz snorted in a way that was kind. "We cleared at 2:29. There's a point where you stop doing a scene the favor of your presence and start doing it a disservice by making it the only room you can see. We wrote a short memo for Marine Rescue, just in case. We called the kiosk owner, apologized for the time, and asked if he'd seen or heard anything weird. He said his phone had rung at 2:18. Just once, he said. Like an apology. In the morning, I got a call from comms while I was brewing the second pot. Telstra says the copper in that pit is disconnected and coiled, she said. There's nothing live between there and the cabinet. They're going to pull the plinth next month as part of a cleanup. They use the words, phantom call, like, that's a thing in a document you can rely on. We could have parked it there. We didn't. You can let a thing unsettle you, or you can file it and wait to see if it repeats. Around here, if you wait long enough, the same dreams come back wearing different shoes. 3 weeks later, nearly the same time of night, comms gave us another one. Triple, 0 silent, key press detected, male breath, possible single word. Origin is Ferry Wharf payphone number. She didn't even try to disguise her tone. It had moved from careful to interested. This time we started on the bridge. Standing above the water, looking down at the jetty changes the way it looks back. The floodlights were off. The starboard marker light blinked, and for a moment, a patch of black farther out looked heavier than the rest, like a boat-shaped darkness. You know better than to chase shapes at 2 in the morning. You do it anyway, so your brain stops making bigger ones. We walked the jetty again, measured it with our boots and our ears, felt the history in the timbers whether we wanted to or not. The plinth had a single cigarette butt on it, fresh, the kind with a gold band around the filter. The kiosk owner smokes those. We bagged it because that's what we do even when the connection feels like a fairy string. Comms, I said. Anything different on the line this time? Operator says she could hear what might be a horn. 3 short blasts. We can't verify. Could be interference, she said. The call lasted exactly 14 seconds. The ferry didn't have that horn. Ours was a polite municipal note that lets you know it was backing. 3 short blasts are an inland water signal for something else. Or it was static. Or it was the wind doing a trick with the bridge. I wrote all 3 possibilities in my head, and then didn't pick one. We went through the rest of the night like we do. A noise complaint turned out to be 2 teenagers teaching each other to play guitar on a veranda under a beach towel. A domestic de-escalated over the washing up. A drunk driver decided the logic of a roundabout applied to the inside of his brain and lost normal human things. Between them, the water's silence stretched like a sheet being shaken. We didn't make jokes. Sometimes you don't. The next day, the comms supervisor sent out an email. Telstra had dug deeper than anyone needed and found that the number that used to belong to the payphone had been recycled for a time and then set aside because every time they tried to sell it to a business owner, it would receive hookup tests in the night it wasn't supposed to. The system had a line on it that marked, in neat corporate language, that the number was not suitable for service. The email closed with assurances about the robustness of the system. I appreciated the effort, if not the comfort. A month after that, I took statements from an old deckhand who used to work the ferry. He's the kind of bloke who calls you mate in a way that makes you wish he'd call you by your name. He told me he'd heard the phone on the wharf ring the night they closed the ferry for good. Rang once after the mayor left, he said. Just once. I didn't answer it. Felt like a trick. We took the boat around to the marina, and that was that. He shrugged like a man who's got one good shrug left. Then he asked me if I knew anyone who'd want a spare length of chain. I said I'd ask Gaz. They haggled good-naturedly for 10 minutes in the station foyer, and I stood there feeling like the world was reminding me it had more than one story. We still get the calls. Not every week. Not enough to make a fuss. Enough that when the sou'easter wakes up after midnight and the tide is on its way in, I'll have comms in my ear saying, 5, 2, triple, 0, silent, possible key press, originating number ferry wharf. And I'll feel the jetty under my feet even if I'm 2 streets over on something else. We go. We look. We listen. Sometimes we hear the ring. Thin as thread. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes the kiosk phone rings once while we're standing there like a thought trying to become a word. If you want a reason, I've got a few. Cross-connect in an old cabinet. Error in a line card. Some Telstra bloke's test script running when it shouldn't. If you want a story, I've got one of those too. A phone that did one job for years and wants to keep doing it. It's always easier to believe in a machine than a ghost. Either way, it buys me the same thing at 2 in the morning. An excuse to stand on old timber and remember that the sea beneath us doesn't care how clever our towers are. Ash asked me, one night after we'd cleared, and the truck heater was making his cheeks pink again, if it bothered me. I told him the truth. Only when I try to make it fit something it doesn't want to. Most things night throws at you want to stay the shape they came in. You learn to let them. On my locker, there's a line I wrote on a strip of tape. It says, "Out there doesn't need you to understand it. It's not wisdom. It's a reminder. When the water slaps the piles and somewhere a bell rings that shouldn't, I can feel the day I'll hand these keys back and someone else will be standing on that jetty at 2:0-something, saying, 'Police, if you can hear me,' wave, and listening for a voice on a line that doesn't exist anymore. And maybe a gull will laugh at them. And maybe a phone will ring once, like an apology, and then do what the sea always does, keep its own time." Story number 5. Night duty on the Mountain Ring Road is a different kind of quiet. You hear your tires find the paint at the edge of a curve and the tiny stones that have wandered onto the lane. You hear stream water somewhere below the guardrail, a thin silver sound that lives there summer or winter. Every tunnel has a breath when you stand at its mouth cooler by a degree, carrying the smell of concrete and damp steel. If the wind is right, you hear your own radio come back from the walls a fraction of a second later. I'm assigned to a substation that covers the western edge of the city and the Old Pass. We deal with the usual fender benders, deer, lost hikers, who underestimate how quickly the light leaves the cedars. When the bypass opened, the old tunnel on the pass was sealed, and the approach road was gated. The city says it's a hazard. Hikers still slip around the barrier for a shorter route to a shrine, and act surprised when they have to share the path with falling leaves and their own common sense. At 2:11, Command put a call on our net in the flat tone that tells you to write the first line of your notebook in your head. Units 7 to 2 and 7 to 5. We have a 110 open line. No voice. Key beep present. The caller ID shows as an emergency telephone line, assigned to Old Pass Tunnel emergency phone number 2. Prefecture Road Center is on the secondary line with us. They report that phone was removed when the tunnel was decommissioned. Any unit respond? I was 7 to 2 that night. My junior, Maury, was riding passenger, doing the thing where he tries to look out all the windows at once in case one view gives him a better night to work with. 7 to 2 received. En route, I said into the mic, already seeing the strip of roadway in my head, the barrier, the sign with too many words, the gate that always looks like it wishes it had taller posts. Command added, "Open line duration 3-8 seconds. Background audio is consistent with low-frequency ventilation, dripping water. There's a single DTMF tone at approximately 20-second intervals. No speech." The operator prompted. No response. Maury glanced at me. "Emergency phone?" he said. "In the old tunnel?" "That's what they said," I answered, and let the engine carry the weight of the question. The road climbed in a series of patient curves, reflectors catching our light and offering it back like coins from an older time. The bypass arcs out of sight to the south, a smooth ribbon with its own expensive wind. The old approach is a thinner spine without shoulders in places. Cedars leaned in and made a roof where the sky thinned to a paper-colored strip. We came to the barrier, painted white when someone cared, and gray now. In a way that wasn't a color so much as an admission. A lock big enough to make a point held the chain. Past it, the road narrowed and disappeared around the bend to the north portal. The sign read "Road closed" in 3 languages, and in the 4th language of scratches from people who don't read signs but like to send messages to the metal. We parked before the gate, squared the car, and let the engine note tick down. The air felt a degree colder against my face. "Command, 7-2 on scene," I said. "Standing by." "Any further contact on the open line?" "Affirmative," Command replied. "Second open line at 0215. Duration 11 seconds. Same background." A faint double click like a handset cradle lifted and replaced. "Road Center confirms there is no handset. They are dispatching a maintenance supervisor with keys to the gate. ETA, 15 minutes. "Copy," I said. "Tamori. Gloves. Lights low." He nodded, already pulling his beanie down over his ears. We stood by the gate and listened. The old tunnel was around the curve, out of sight. The bypass hum was a soft, distant thing to the south. A fox barked twice from downslope and then decided we weren't worth announcing. Water tapped somewhere unseen. The kind of conditions in which you could convince yourself you had someone else's memories for a minute. "Gingsad Darakaimaska?" I called. "Police. Anyone there?" My voice went into the dark and came back in short pieces from the trees. Mori added, "Moshi kinkoemaska," in the polite cadence that always sounds nicer at 2 in the morning. If someone had been within 20 meters and not hiding themselves on purpose, they would have heard us. No answer came. It didn't feel like a refusal. It felt like the space decided it had nothing to say. "Command, 7-2, 3rd open line. Duration 5 seconds. We're hearing." One tone, then silence. "Road Center is advising their records show the cable pair to that device was cut back to the junction pit L3 inches, 2016. That pit is 50 meters inside the north portal." "They cut it inside the tunnel?" Mori repeated, not to anyone except the cold. "Prefecture contractor removed all devices." "Yes," I said, "because you can hear the tone of a maintenance report even when you've never seen it. They always read like a job that will go back to sleep if you leave it alone." We waited with our breath, making small fog around the edge of our lamps. I like to think I can tell the difference between the sound of water dropping from a ceiling and water finding its shirt on the ground. The drops were too regular for a roof leak. They sounded like a slow metronome, set by a hand that wanted to be careful. Headlights slid up the last curve like a thought changing its mind. A small truck eased in behind our car, beacon lights soft in the trees. The man who stepped out wore a company jacket and had the flat, awake face of someone whose day is whenever the phone chooses. He bowed slightly, because he had more manners than the hour deserved. "Road Center," he said. "I'm Seki. Police," I said, and gave our names. "We're told the line is dead." He nodded in that careful way people nod when they're going to explain something that will sound logical even if you don't believe it. "We have the record that the emergency telephones were removed," he said. "The north portal pair was pulled back to pit L3. Power was isolated at the old control cabinet on the south side. We left the conduit in place. The old amplifier in the north wall was disconnected, but not physically removed. I have a key to the gate." We stepped to the chain. He took a key ring out with 100 ways to say "authorized" on it, and found the right steel with his fingertips like it was a conversation he had often. The lock came open with the intimate clack of a machine doing the only job it knows. We moved the chain enough to walk through. The road beyond the gate felt like a room the party left, but old music might still be hiding under the furniture. The north portal came into sight after the bend. A circle in the hillside, sealed with a steel gate, bolted to concrete on each side. A sign riveted to the bars. Read, "Do not enter." Under that, a sticker, newer. "Contact Road Centro in emergency." The ventilation louvers above were dusted white with lime. Beyond the bars, the tunnel was a piece of night with a shape, darker than the dark outside, which is a trick you don't see unless you stand where we were at 2 in the morning. We listened. The drip was louder, the echo behind it stuttering like a person trying to match their own steps and failing. The kind of place where a whisper would sound like a decision. Command, I said low. We're at the gate. Nothing obvious, but acoustics are active. Copy, Command said. Fourth open line just connected and dropped. Road center is patching in. Stand by. I heard a click in my earpiece that wasn't our net. The kind of click a headset makes when someone else in another room leans closer to theirs. Then a new voice, male, speaking with the slow exactness of a man who has been told to be helpful on record. This is the road center operator. We have a record that the old line numbers are still reserved internally, but no circuits are live. We also have a call log to your 110 from the North device ID. That should not be possible. Seki fitted another key into a cylinder at the side of the gate. There was a healthy reluctance in the mechanism, and then a concession. The square of steel swung enough to let us pass into the mouth. The air inside was 2 or 3 degrees cooler and smelled like wet stone. Our lamps made cones of white that touched the curve and curled back in. The tunnel ate sound, and then gave it back in slices. We didn't go far. Safety says you don't enter a decommissioned structure unless your purpose justifies it and your support is right behind you. Ours was watching the gate and listening. 5 meters in, an emergency recess opened on the left, a rectangle where the old phone had lived, 4 bolt holes in a neat pattern, a square discoloration on the wall. Above it, a faded pictogram, a hand on a handset, an arrow to a dot. The recess had a conduit entry at the bottom, with a stub of cable still sitting like a short tail capped with tape that had given up on adhesive and decided to become a suggestion. Seki crouched without touching anything and held a small test set in his fingers, the kind of little butt phone techs keep. Alligator clips, a speaker, and a stubborn optimism. Just to humor the night, he said with a small smile that made me like him. He clipped the leads to the stub and put the set to his ear. We all heard it. Not a dial tone, but a thin, constant hiss like wind in wire, and the faintest tick at regular intervals. Not quite 20 seconds, slightly longer. He held up a finger like a conductor marking time. There, he said quietly, and then the tick came again. Battery check beep, he guessed. But there should be no battery. My shoulder radio squelched with Command stepping on herself a little like she'd leaned in too far. 7 to 2, we just got another open line. 3 seconds. Click, beep, click. We can hear your voices faintly. Not enough to make out words. We're getting feedback from something. Mori looked at me. He's young enough that when something leans into the side of what you call normal, his eyes ask if I'm going to tell him it's fine. I nodded because you can't get work done if everyone narrates their inside weather out loud at once. Seki held the test set out so I could hear. Up close, the hiss had a room sound to it, as if a microphone was listening to a big concrete space. If you've ever stood in a tunnel and sung one note under your breath, you know the color of that air. The tick kept time. I counted with my heartbeat and stopped because there's only so much you can ask your body to coordinate at 2:30. Can the line be back? Fed from somewhere? I asked. Power, I mean. From the south control cabinet. The south cabinet was removed, he said. The north amp is dead. If there is any power on this, it would have to be induced, or a stray from another pair. Moisture can do strange things. We've had call boxes in live tunnels. Self-trigger from condensation on certain nights if the wind is right. He smiled again. The short kind of smile that says men have long memories of strange nights. We stepped another 2 meters and stopped, not because anything told us to, but because an instinct that grows out of your shins and up your spine tells you where to stop. The rough spray-on fireproofing on the walls had slumped in places. The photoluminescent exit sign further in still held a tired green from a sun it hadn't seen in years. A single leaf had learned how to survive in that world, wedged in a crack near a drainage channel, a stupid little green that made me want to laugh. "Jingshot this," I called again, softer. "Moshi naka ni iru nara, koe dashite kudasai." Police. If you're inside, call out. The tunnel returned my words with a compression that didn't feel like echo so much as a speaker turned up in an empty room. Mori said, "Hello?" In English for no reason, except it sometimes makes people not expecting Japanese relax. We listened so hard that our hearing changed shape. The test set crackled, and Seki blinked. "I heard that," he said. "Your voice." "Command?" I said. "We heard it too," she replied. We can hear a male voice and a secondary faint voice on the line. The line dropped. We didn't go deeper. The line wasn't going to give us a person to hand a blanket to. We checked the floor for prints. Nothing but damp and old grit. We checked the bars and the lock for fresh scrapes. None. We checked the weeds that had pushed back from the edge of the portal. They were bent the way plants bend when snow has a memory. Back at the gate, Seki made a call to his supervisor on a private phone. I could hear his side. Yes, the stub has induced hiss. No, I didn't push the circuit. Police are on site. Yes, please request remote to isolate again. He listened, then nodded, to himself more than to the voice. Remote says the north spur is physically lifted at the exchange. They're going to pull the card for that block. To be sure, we waited. The hiss on the test set softened, then grew a little, then softened. The tick kept its own time. Then, without drama, it stopped. The test set went flat like someone took a thumb off a mouth. Command said, "Nothing further at this time." The road center operator on the other line said, "We removed the card." Seki unclipped, wiped the old tape with a gloved thumb like he was telling it to behave, and stood. We closed the gate. The lock did its old faithful sound. We walked back to the barrier with the little things of the night handling themselves without us. A moth touching the edge of my lamp. The taste of iron in the air. That you only get near old water. Maury's breath making fog that disappeared before it could count as weather. We wrote what we could write. Times. Names. Durations. Beeps. We did not write that the tunnel had felt like a chest holding breath, but we both thought it. The road center sent us a short report 2 days later. It didn't answer anything in a way that feels like an answer, but it tried. The old circuit blocks for the emergency phones had not been fully removed from the exchange. Moisture ingress in the conduit could create a low resistance path that simulated a call signal if conditions aligned. A ventilation duct in the north portal wall had not been fully sealed, causing intermittent airflow that could produce a microphone effect. We will schedule removal of the residual hardware, it said. Until then, we cannot explain the caller ID being accepted by the exchange into the 110 network. We regret any confusion. It read like a man apologizing for a weather he didn't make. A week after, there was a follow-up at 2-3. Command. 110 open line. Caller ID. Old tunnel phone. One whisper, male, possibly Moshi. Then disconnected. We didn't go up, not because we were tired of it, but because weather had dropped a sheet of rain on the pass, and there were 3 cars spun around on the bypass asking for our time. Seki messaged later during the day shift to say they'd pulled the last piece of the old equipment from the north recess. No more line to misbehave, he wrote, and added a small smile emoji that made him seem younger. We haven't had that caller since. Sometimes you let yourself believe cause and effect. Sometimes you let the silence be a coincidence. I still drive past the barrier at least once a night when it's my area. Not because I expect anything, but because I like to know how the gate looks in different moods. The sign gets a new scratch sometimes. The weeds change their mind about which way to lean. The air at the mouth still has its degree of difference. The tunnel still feels like a room remembering the sound of its own machines. If you want the practical ledger, yes, devices in this country will call 110, even if they don't have much else to give. Yes, decommissioned equipment can leave its fingerprints on a network longer than the manual says. Yes, water and wind team up to make pranksters of perfectly good wires. If you want the other ledger, sometimes a place keeps an idea longer than it should, and that idea finds a way to make the phone ring a few more times because that's what it used to do when people stood in front of it needing help. Maury asked me later if it bothered me that we heard our voices on the test set. I told him there are rooms and wires that will do that if you meet them halfway. He nodded like men nod when they're filing something in the part of their head that says, "I'll think about that at inconvenient times." Now when command says, 110 open line, unidentified caller, my fingers do a small thing on the steering wheel before my brain does. I picture a recess in a wall where a phone used to be, a little rectangle of cleaner concrete, and a stub of cable that learned to hold a sound and let it go. And I take the next call, and the one after that because the night is long and the work is quiet more often than not. And there are still people who will lift a receiver that isn't there and say, Moshi, just to see if the world will answer back. Story number 6. The nights out here are so flat you can feel them. You drive along a road on top of a dike, and the whole world is black water to your left and blacker fields to your right, and the only light comes from your own car, and the orange glow of a distant town hiding behind a line of willow trees. The wind changes pitch as it moves around the car, and when you stop, you hear it pluck at the reeds like fingers on wires. If there's fog, it sits low and stubborn. If there isn't, the stars are a lid you could lean against. I'm a patrol officer in a rural district where the roads are straight, the turns are 90 degrees, and the addresses sometimes have more numbers than you think they need. We look after villages, farm lanes, and the strips of tarmac that ride the dikes between canals. There's a water authority that runs pumps and gates to keep everything behaving. They have their own people and their own control room, but when someone dials 112, it's us who start the ball rolling. It was a weekday technically. The clock said 1:39. Control put it out with that even tone you get at that hour. Unit Bravo. 4. We have a 112 silent call. Originating line identifies as Water Authority Pump Station, 7 North Dyke Road. Operator reports no voice. Key press tone heard once. Line dropped. Caller ID rings out as non-service. Any unit respond? I was already on the Dyke Road for a few small car checks. Bravo. 4, copy. I'm 2 minutes away, I said. My colleague was off with the traffic car, so it was just me and the radio and the way the road felt narrower when it doesn't have anything else to measure itself against. Control added, we have a second connection. 12 seconds. Background hum consistent with machinery. One faint beep every 29 seconds. Operator prompted. No response. We'll notify the water authority. I know that station. Pump Station 7 is a low, square building with a sloped roof tucked into the side of the dike like it was embarrassed to be there. There's a gravel pull-off and a metal door painted the same gray as the sky thinks it is. Pipes disappear into concrete and come out on the other side into the canal. If you stand close, you can feel a thrum through your boots when the pumps are running hard. It's not dramatic. It's like holding a sleeping animal. I pulled in and killed the headlights so I could see how the dark wanted to behave. The station's exterior light was off. The canal lay like a long piece of glass that had forgotten how to be glass. The reeds made their small noises. The wind turbines on the far edge of the district blinked red dots into the night farther than they should. I sat still for a 10 count. Because you learn things if you let the world tell you how it's feeling before you ask questions. Control Bravo. 4 on scene, I said, stepping out and zipping my jacket. The air here always has a wet metal smell, even when it hasn't rained. Received, Control said. Water Authority on. Call is en route. 10 minutes. They say the station is currently in auto, unmanned. Remote dashboard shows no alarms. I put my hand to the metal door. Cold, of course, but dry. I knocked. Because you keep habits. Police? I called. Even though I didn't expect anyone to answer. In the night, your own voice can feel like a stranger's. Control again. We have a third contact. 7 seconds. Same origin. The operator heard a voice but couldn't make out words. It could be your call at the door. The line dropped. I waited. I listened. You can tell the pumps are running by the way the ground agrees with itself. There was a steady hum under everything. Nothing frantic. The kind of working sound that tells you the world is currently contained. An estate car turned into the pull-off, headlights pointed low, beacon bar dark. A man in a high-visibility jacket with a Water Authority logo stepped out with a ring of keys that could open old houses. He had the posture of someone used to being cold on purpose. I'm the on-call, he said. Control rang. You had a 112 call from in there? That's what they said, I answered. No voice. Machine noise. A beep. He frowned with his mouth more than his eyes, which is how people who have done one job too long think out loud. There's no phone in there. Not anymore. We had an old analog line for maintenance years ago. It was cut when we switched to digital. The cabinet at the road was pulled. We run everything through our own network now. He held up the keys. We can go in. We stepped inside. Pump houses don't smell like oil the way people think. They smell like concrete and water and a little like electricity. The floor had a grid of drains you could stand on. To the left, a panel like a wardrobe full of lights and 2 rows of switches, all labeled in neat print the way people who dislike surprises label things. To the right, the mouths of 2 pipes with big valves, painted red when someone wanted to be good and now a dull, sensible shade of not red. The hum was louder. It didn't need to be this loud to feel like it filled the room. The man with the keys, he said his name was Jost, but I'll just call him the technician, moved the way people do around power. Careful, polite. I looked for a phone out of habit. There was a metal plate on the wall where one had lived, 4 bolt holes making a polite rectangle, and a piece of conduit that ended in a cap stub. Above it, someone had left the old vinyl sticker, Emergency 112. There was a neat square on the wall cleaner than the paint around it where a notice had once been. Empty space where words had been feels different. You can't write that in a report. But it's true. The technician went to the control panel and looked at the screen that told him what the pumps thought of themselves. No alarms, he said. No call-outs. Level is a little high because of the wind, but within everything normal. We don't have a handset. We don't have any line that can call out to you. The only line in is power and our own data. Control's voice came in my ear close as a whisper. Bravo. 4, 4th connection. 5 seconds. The operator notes. 2 clicks. Then a single ringback tone, like a phone testing a line. There was also a short tone every 30 seconds they can't identify. Still no speech. I repeated it for the technician. He stepped closer to the place where the old phone had been and tilted his head like he was listening for a sound he'd heard in his first year and never heard again. We had that landline run through the old copper trunk, he said, thoughtful. All cut. We had ghosts on the board when it rained sometimes. That's why we ripped it out. But calls? No. He squinted at the conduit. I can pull the cap and humor the night. He took out a screwdriver and popped the plastic cap. Inside, a twist of dead wires sat like veins in a museum piece. He didn't touch them. He just looked at the edges, as if he could read a history in the dirt. He put the cap back on almost apologetically, like he didn't want to wake anything. We walked the station. There's not much to walk. A narrow stair down to a grate, where you can look at the water coming in. A narrow stair up to the pipes that take it away. Everything painted, everything numbered. Close to the floor, a tiny, tidy line of salt crust marked where the air had been damp too long, years ago. Close to the ceiling, a spider web shook when the larger pump cycled up a fraction and then settled. That was the only movement the room seemed to allow itself. Control, I said. We're inside the pump house with the technician. No persons found. No sign of entry. Received, Control said. For your information, the Water Authority control room reports no alarms and no remote dial-outs from the station. They are checking their logs. We have a 5th connection. 3 seconds. The operator thinks she heard a faint hello. Could be a breath. Then a disconnect. The technician glanced at the control cabinet again like an annoyed parent checking a child's fever. He tapped a key. A line explained itself to him and not to me. Nothing here says this place wants attention, he said. We stepped back outside. The night felt bigger after the square honesty of the pump room. The reeds had found a new rhythm. The canal surface had a skin of ripples that didn't match the wind, as if somewhere else had decided how the water should behave here. That's normal for a place like this. A gate opens 3 kilometers away, and everything changes shape without asking. I walked around the exterior for the rituals we used to tell ourselves we did the right things. Locks intact. No new scrape on a doorframe. No fresh footprints on the gravel that weren't ours. I stood in the lee of the building and listened for a while because I didn't want to go back to the car with nothing except what we already had. The wind found an edge in the corner brick and made a tone like a bottle top rubbed with a finger. Once, twice, and then not again. Control called back on the channel the way she does when she's leaning in toward the screen without meaning to. Bravo. 4. Water Authority confirms the station had an analog line assigned years ago. The number matches the caller ID we saw. The system shows it as decommissioned. There should be no active route. They're escalating to their telecom vendor. Also, a resident 2 kilometers south just rang to say she heard a phone ring once near the dike at around 1:42. She said she was walking her dog and thought it was odd to hear a ring where there aren't phones. The technician laughed without contempt. "We have a lot of things that make noises people want to name," he said. "Heard a swan take off at night? Sounds like a cupboard falling down the stairs." He looked at the water, then back at the door. "But a ring I can't explain." We took our time with our notes because sometimes giving a place a few more minutes reveals something that makes the next bit of paperwork smarter. It didn't. We cleared the scene. The technician locked up with the confidence of someone who trusts his bolts. He said he'd let us know if their control room found something and then stood for a second with his hands in his pockets, staring at the water the way you do when you know it personally. He drove away with his lights low until he needed them to be high. On the way back, control updated me. Telecom vendor reports the old number is flagged retired. They have no record of it routing anywhere. They also have a note on the account from 2 years ago that says, "Spurious inbound calls to emergency noted during storms. Suspected cross at cabinet. Cabinet removed." They did not explain how a caller ID presents from a number that no longer exists. Over the next month, there were 2 more. Not every night. Not predictable. On a windy night with a hard push from the sea, a 112 silent call with the same beep, the same hum. Another time, clear weather and a ring, just once, and then nothing. We went, every time. We stood in the same pump house and listened to a noise that never changed its mind enough to call it an alarm. The technician met us when he could. When he couldn't, the control room watched the numbers for us and told us they were behaving. Once, when it was a different technician, younger, he brought a small test phone like the ones the old telephone men used. A little box with a handset and a switch, and a bravado that belonged to an earlier period in history. He clipped it to the dead wires out of a kind of professional curiosity, and then held it to his ear. He raised an eyebrow and handed it to me. I put it to my head because I knew I would. Even if it was stupid. I could hear what I would describe, if asked in a courtroom, as room tone. A very light breath of air, the suggestion of a big space, and, distantly, at regular intervals, a small electronic chirp. Nothing else. No voice. No dial tone. Just the sound of a place keeping its time. Control told me once that she could hear us too on one of these calls. Not our words, just the rhythm of someone talking in a room with machines. "It's like the line is on but not finished being a line," she said, and then laughed at herself and said she needed more sleep. The water authority did their due diligence the way professionals do. They pulled the last bit of old copper out of the conduit and documented it. They sent us a report that said the old number was removed from the switch routing. They added that a storm and a certain wind direction could induce currents in the remaining lengths of infrastructure that had not yet been physically removed. In rare cases, it said, legacy devices can present to the public network in ways that are not supported. It's a sentence that might be true, and certainly looks like one. One night, a local farmer flagged me down on the dike. He had the comfortable way of someone who keeps his own times. "You going to the pump house?" he asked. I said no, not tonight. He nodded at the water like a man nods at an old friend he argues with. "My father said that place used to have a phone on the outside wall in case anyone needed it," he said. He said it rang on its own sometimes when the level was high. He said he didn't answer it because the water doesn't talk to you in words. That was his way. He shrugged like there was nothing more to share, and there wasn't, really. We haven't had one of those calls in a few weeks now. The world is busy with other noises. But I drive that road most nights, because it's mine, and because the dark looks different depending on where you stand on it. When the wind comes up and the reed heads click like beads, I look over at the low square of the pump house, and I think about a number that no longer exists, riding through a network that insists nothing like that can happen. I think about the sound of the little beep. I think about the way your own voice sounds in a room built to move water. The story doesn't ask for more than that. It doesn't offer it either. If you want a sensible answer, I can give you a list. Legacy wiring, misrouted caller ID, spirits of electricity living in coils and conduits. The way moisture makes everything better at being what it shouldn't. If you want something you can hold at 2 in the morning when the radio is quiet and the world is wider than your headlights, I can give you this. Sometimes a place calls you because calling is what it did, And even when you remove the phone and take down the sticker and write a report, the place remembers how to do it. I don't plan to be dramatic about it. It's just something I carry like the way a road feels under tires in a certain weather. So when Control says, "We've got a 112 silent call from Pump Station 7, I'll turn onto North Dyke Road again and let the car lengthen out on the straight. And I'll park in the same gravel where my boot soles already know how to sit. And I'll put my hand to a metal door that will be colder than the air. And I'll listen to a room that has its own breath. And maybe there will be a beep, and maybe there won't. And that will be fine either way." Story number 7. Graveyard runs in my patch mean long stretches where the highway is more an idea than a place. You spend a lot of time on sealed roads with white posts ticking by, a river off to one side sounding like a coat being shaken out, and single-lane bridges that make you sit up straight even if nothing's coming the other way. You learn the pitch of the wind when it's pushing up valley. You learn which bends hold cold longer. And you learn the noise a one-lane bridge makes when you lay tires on its first plank at 2 in the morning. I was halfway through nights on a midweek when comms called it. All units, 111 open line, no voice, originating to the Gorge Bridge on the state route, marker 124. AML shows high confidence on the span. Background audio, wind, periodic metallic knock, no speech. Any unit respond. I was 20 minutes up the road already, rolling the long straight where the river runs tight to the cliff like it's shy. "Copy, I'll take it," I said, and flicked the light bar to low just to make the corners honest. My partner that night was Roberts. He's quiet, more because he thinks before he speaks than because he's got nothing to say. He glanced at me, watchful, and pulled the notebook he keeps on the dash closer in case the night wanted details. Comms again. Secondary contact from the same caller ID. 17 seconds. Operator reports a single tone every 30 seconds. Could be a keypad or alarm panel. No voice. Caller ID shows as a roadside emergency phone registered to the transport agency. That number is supposed to be retired. Roberts lifted an eyebrow. "Those yellow phones they used to bolt to the rail?" he asked. "That's the idea," I said. "They pulled most of them when mobile coverage got better. Some are still on the big bridges. Not this one, as far as I knew. The Gorge Bridge is a narrow truss from another era. Timber deck, steel lattice sides, one lane with giveaway signs at either end, and a no stopping that people forget when they want to take a photo of water doing a trick it's been doing for a million years. At night, the deck boards talk under you. The steel makes a sound in crosswinds like a bottle top rubbed with a thumb. There's a small lay-by at the north end, just big enough for one ute, or a caravan if the driver knows what they're doing. The river sits beneath like a long, dark muscle. We rolled into the lay-by and let the engine tick down. You feel the bridge before you hear it. It gives a low hum through your boots, a long, patient tone that says the structure is awake even if you aren't. The wind shoved around the truss and found the chord it likes. The stars were holding their breath. The only other light was the distant flash of an aircraft warning on a hilltop mast. "Comms on scene," I said. "Bridge is clear. No vehicles on the span. No one obvious at the abutments." "Received," comms said. "Be advised. Third open line just now. 12 seconds. Operator prompted. Heard nothing but wind and a knock. The knock interval is 6 to 8 seconds. We've got the transport agency duty manager on a second line." I walked to the start of the span and stopped with my toes on the first board, like a man deciding whether the sea was willing. Robert stood off my shoulder, lamp tipped down so we didn't blind each other. The truss threw our light back as 1,000 thin shadows. The deck was slick with condensation that hadn't decided to be frost yet. I shone under the rail down to the river. The water was black and fast, with white smears where it argued with rock. No fresh scrape on the abutment. No bumper on a hinge where there shouldn't be one. No light from below. "Police?" I called, steady and even. "If you called, call out or wave a light." My voice went into the metal and came back thinner and older. Roberts did the same because he knows that the dumb things like speaking out loud can matter. From comms, closer to my ear than the river was. "We have a fourth connection, 10 seconds. We can hear your voice faintly. It's like you're in a big room." Then the line drops. Roberts and I looked at each other. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We cleared the span slow, staying to one side so we could step off the deck if a set of lights ghosted over the crest from either direction. At the midpoint, the hum went from something under my boots to something I could feel in my teeth. It was the bridge talking to itself. The wind changed and the lattice took a breath and let it go. From somewhere up inside the steel, a small rattle answered the gusts like a coin in a jar kept on a high shelf. With my hand on the rail, I could feel every conversation the structure had ever had. We stopped where the truss is highest and looked down again. If a car had gone over, the signs would be there, the scar on the rail, the fresh tear in the weeds, the broken crumb of something you'd recognize. There was nothing but the same long water and a set of possum prints where one had walked the curb earlier, in that unearned confidence possums have. Control, I said, using the other name I use when I want to feel like we're talking to a room of people and not just one voice. Do we have a callback option? Negative, she said. Caller ID is a fixed line assigned to that span, registered as retired. The operator can't call it back. The duty manager from the transport agency says that phone was removed 8 years ago when the bridge was upgraded. The copper was cut back at the north abutment. A pair of headlights appeared on the far approach and slowed as they saw our car. We blocked the bridge with our bodies in reflective, and the driver had the sense to wait. Roberts lifted a hand in thanks, and the car lights went low, and the engine made a patient idle. If you make a habit of working on roads at night, you learn to recognize who is likely to hurt you without meaning to. This one wasn't. The duty manager arrived 10 minutes later in a white ute with a magnetic beacon he clipped to the roof. He was lean and had that long daylight pallor people get who spend more time in an office than they let on. He shook my hand like a man who'd stood on a lot of bridges and been asked why they behaved the way they behave. We haven't had a phone on this one for a long time, he said. Used to be a yellow box at mid-span. Vandals got it more than drivers used it. We ripped it. The line's dead. We keep a conduit to pull new stuff if we ever need it, but there's no copper in it. Comms is seeing a number present itself as that phone, I said. They're getting wind and a metal knock and a beep every 30 seconds. He frowned, thoughtful rather than annoyed. Expansion joints can knock in a crosswind, he said, nodding at the deck ends. Beep though? We walked to the north abutment with him sweeping a work lamp along the beam. At knee height, half hidden by a bracket, a small painted plate showed the bridge's ID number and the year the deck planks were last replaced. Next to it, a stub of gray conduit ended in a capped oval. I tapped it with a knuckle. It sounded the way plastic that's been in the weather sounds. He took a screwdriver and popped the cap. Inside, you could see the black throat of the conduit run, empty, no wires. He shone his light, and we all looked into the small mouth like it might have an opinion. He put the cap back on and tightened it with a small nod that said, "There." Comms came again, tone a shade flatter, which for her means more interested. Another open line. 3 seconds. The operator says they heard a ringback tone start and stop. A single beep. No voice. The number on the switch is labeled Bridge Phone Northspan. Roberts and I stepped onto the deck again and stood still. The wind pushed once, and then stopped like it had been reminded to think of something else. In the quiet, I heard something I would have bet good money I would not hear. A tiny bell, not a mobile chirp, not a digital chime. A real bell ring, the kind you get in old handsets. A quick double note, thin and wrong in all that steel. It may have been a small rock trapped in the right shape of steel. It may have been nothing. The duty manager looked at me and I saw my own expression mirrored back. We didn't invent a drama. We did the jobs that make us able to sleep later. We checked under the east abutment down a goat track I have walked to, many times in daylight to count. The rock shelf was damp and made the small squeak under boots that damp rock makes. The river smelled like cold iron. A fern moved in a draft that came from nowhere I could see. We watched our feet and came back up and checked the west side and found nothing new to turn into a reportable thing. Comms updated what she knew as the back and forth between her and the operator continued. The first call had been at 1:36, a second at 1:41, then 1:49. Each one short, each one wind, knock, beep. The transport agency's night tech had got out of bed to say their switch records showed no live line on that ID. They're escalating to their vendor, she said. We may get an answer that isn't very satisfying. The duty manager did a thing you don't often see. He admitted the limits without making it sound like a shrug. We've had this sort of thing on tunnels, he said, legacy hardware grabbing attention, Moisture in the wrong place. Odd voltages doing what they shouldn't. But a call routing to 111 from a number we pulled? That's new. We'll have a look at the cabinet in the morning. We stood long enough that sitting would have felt wrong. We did one more walk mid-span. While we were there, Com said quietly, "We can hear you again on the line, faint. The tone beeped while you were mid-span. The AML still plots on the bridge." We didn't feel anything change when she said it. That was almost the worst part. We cleared after 40 minutes with nothing to hold except timestamps, and the way the steel sounded under a south wind. The duty manager thanked us for coming out, sincerely. He asked if we wanted to put a temporary bridge closed sign up until the morning. We said no, because nothing we could write on a sign would make cars slower or faster in the way a story would, and we didn't have a story we could say out loud yet. In the morning, I had an email from comms. The vendor's reply was as technical as you'd expect and as soothing as a doctor's waiting room. The retired number had remained reserved in the network for a block of roadside devices. Under certain failures, a status ping could be treated as a call. It shouldn't route to 111, they said. We cannot reproduce the event. They added. The transport agency did their part too. A crew came out and opened the little panel under the north abutment. It was a blank plate and a lot of dust. They sent us a photo of a thing that looked blank and important in the way blank things in official emails do. 2 nights later, comms put out another one. 111 open line. Same caller ID. Short. Background wind and faint metallic. A high-pitched tone every 30 seconds. Same bridge. Same time window. Same weather. As if the night was a record stuck on a groove. We went. We walked. We listened. Down in the river gravel on the west side, I found an old piece of yellow plastic brittle enough to break just by thinking about it. It had a truncated symbol on it that could have been a handset. It could also have been from a safety vest. We didn't build a cathedral out of a scrap, but we put it in a bag anyway, because otherwise you leave the night with your hands empty and that can be worse. We started spotting a pattern. Not every time the wind came up, not every dry night, but on nights when the air came down valley with a bite and the deck tapped a little under its joints, comms would get their tone and their wind, and we'd get our walk and our hearing. Once, while we were mid-span, my shoulder radio played back a half-syllable of my own voice with a delay like I'd stepped on a repeater footprint. Roberts looked at me and I looked at him, and we both decided it was radio doing radio tricks and nothing more. I talked to an older patrolman who worked this area when the yellow phones were still normal. He told me a story about a car that broke down on that bridge in the 90 seconds. How the driver had gone to the box and found it dead. How the river had been loud that night and the stars had been close. He said the phone had rung once while they were waiting for the tow. He said nobody answered it. He said the next week, the phone had graffiti all over it, and 3 months later, it was gone. He didn't make a face like he wanted to spin it into anything heavier than it was. He just told it and drank his coffee and chuckled at something unrelated on the television in the station lounge. We stopped getting those calls for a while. Then one came at 2:07 on a wet night when the deck felt like an old cat, underfoot bones you could feel. Movement that was polite but sure. Comms said the operator thought she heard a word inside the wind. She couldn't make it. She didn't commit to hello or help. She wrote, male voice, low, possibly 1 syllable. We did our walk. At the center, I put my glove flat on the rail. It vibrated like a line between 2 points. I said out loud, if you're there, we're here. It wasn't for comms. It wasn't for a report. It was for me. The wind pushed all the way through the span and out the other side and didn't bother to slow down. If you need practical answers, I can give you the honest ones. Legacy numbers live longer than the people who assigned them. Networks have corners. Even the engineers don't see all the time. Old conduits breathe. Steel sings when the wind tunes it. A click every 30 seconds can be a heartbeat from cheap electronics nowhere near a phone. If you want the other answer, the one people ask for at barbecues when they've heard you work nights, I can give you that too. Some places decide they still want to make the phone ring, even after you take the phone away. Roberts asked me after our last one if it bothered me that comms could hear us sometimes. I told him it bothers me when it stops. The night's big. When it talks back, it turns into something I can measure with footsteps and breaths. When it doesn't, I feel like I'm the only moving thing in a world that forgot it could move. Now, whenever I run that route, I slow a fraction at marker 124, even if the span is empty, and I've got no reason to. I keep the radio a touch higher through the truss. I feel the way the deck hums through my boots like it knows its own history. If comms calls with 111 open line, no voice, the bridge again. I don't think ghosts. I think wind, wires, water, and the stubborn way some numbers refuse to stop doing their jobs. And I go stand in the middle while the river goes about its work and the steel plays the notes it knows. And I wait for a beep that sometimes comes on time and sometimes doesn't, and then I go home before the sun shocks the night into acting like it never happened. Story number 8. Night on the motorway isn't loud the way people think. It's long. Headlights sliding past like slow meteor showers. White lines peeling under your bonnet. Reflectors winking out and back in as if the road is breathing. My patch is a stretch of highway that cuts through forest. A ribbon of tarmac elevated on embankments and bridges, with lay-bys and blue signs that promise fuel and coffee if you leave the fast lane for 5 minutes. At 2 in the morning, the lorries own it. They move like careful buildings. The cars in between are the ones you watch. I work motorway patrol. The calls are predictable until they're not. Breakdowns on the hard shoulder. Because someone believed the fuel gauge, deer too bold for their own good. Tires shredded and flailing like rope. The odd wrong-way driver who turns 3 beats of your heart into a year. What you don't plan for is a call from a phone that doesn't exist anymore. Control put it out at 2:19. Units on the motorway network. We have an open 110 call. No voice. The originating ID is an emergency call column. Marker 70, 2.4, northbound. Operator reports a periodic tone every 30 seconds. Background consistent with wind and passing traffic. Any unit nearby? I was running north with my partner that night. A man who can sit still for 6 hours and then move like a switch just flipped. Control, this is motorway 22. We're 6 minutes out from 72, I said, already feeling the mile markers in my head. A small lay-by, a line of pines, a gentle downward curve and a bridge over a farm track. If you've driven a road enough, your mind keeps a map of the sounds and the smells. Control again, quiet but clear, the voice that gets you through the parts where night tries the edges of your calm. Received. Second contact now. 15 seconds. Operator prompted. Heard nothing. Same ID. Road Authority confirms the column at that marker is listed as removed last spring. They're contacting their duty manager. Emergency call columns on our network used to be orange or yellow boxes on posts, with a button and a built-in phone, little lifelines for when mobiles weren't everywhere. They've been pulled bit by bit as coverage improved. Some still stand near tunnels and long bridges, newer, solar-powered and talking to space instead of copper under the ground. 72.4 had been one of the old ones. We rolled up with hazard lights washing the trees on the verge with orange. The wind was up a touch, pushing through the pine tops and painting the noise of the carriageway with a low note. I parked at the start of the lay-by, nosed out, because that's the way you learn to do it without anyone writing it on a list. The kilometer marker, 72.4, sat on its short post, reflective strip, catching our headlamps like it wanted to make sure we knew where we were. Where the column had been, there was a square of concrete with 4 bolt heads and a plastic conduit capped flush with the surface. No post, no box, just the ghost of one. Control 2 on scene, I said, stepping out, the wind finding the gap at the back of my collar that I didn't know was there. Received. Be advised. Third open line. 10 seconds. Operator says, wind, traffic, 1 tone. No speech. Duty manager from the Road Authority is en route. 10 minutes. We stood and listened. Our car ticked as parts cooled. A truck went by, tires hissing, diesel notes steady and civilized. Farther down the straight, another truck answered with its own version of the same song. The capped conduit at our feet did what plastic does in the cold, kept its shape and pretended it had never had a purpose. Police, I called, even though I wasn't calling into an open window or a hedge or a house. If you called us, wave a light, shout. It sounds foolish when you say it out loud to open air and a patch of concrete, but I've done this long enough to know foolish is cheaper than what you feel. If you don't do it and later learn, you should have. My partner crouched by the base and put a gloved finger to the plastic. He's the sort who likes to verify a thing with more than his eyes. He tilted his head, listening. He didn't say anything, which told me he heard exactly what I heard. Motorway. Wind. The small quiet between those two when a gap opens and nothing pretends to be a third thing. White lights swung up behind us, and then dipped as a plain pickup eased into the lay-by. The road authority duty manager stepped out with a flashlight and a key ring that says, "I belong to the parts of the road you don't see." He introduced himself with that economy you learn on nights, and then he said, without me asking anything, "We pulled this one last year. Cable was cut and lifted. The number's dead at the exchange. The column got scrapped. There's nothing here. Control is getting calls from it," I said. He frowned without surprise. "We've had columns talk to us after they're gone," he said. "Old copper and rain can do tricks, but it shouldn't present as a proper ID to 110. The columns never called police directly. They called our center. We decided who to pass on to. They're saying it went straight to you?" "Operator says it came with a police emergency ID," I said. He knelt and popped the cap off the conduit stub with a flat screwdriver. Inside, black space. No cable. A strand of spider silk caught the light and drew a line from one edge to the other. He didn't reach in. He put the cap back on like he was closing a book. Control's voice came again, a breath closer, a shade more focused. "Fourth contact. 8 seconds. Operator heard your voice faintly when you said police, then tone, then drop. Road Center says their log also shows an inbound in the same second to their ID for this column, which should not be possible." The duty manager blew out through his teeth. "We'll check the cabinet 2 kilometers up," he said, "where this feed used to join the rest. Maybe a spur got left in when it was pulled." We followed him along the verge to a locked gray cabinet that sat in the little triangle between the lay-by and the slope down to trees. He opened it with a key like every other key, and every key at once. Inside, tidy rows of terminals and a few spare loops of cable, neatly labeled in handwriting that looked like a person who still uses pencil. He ran his light along the rows and tapped labels with the back of a fingernail. "This pair is dead," he said almost to himself. "This one's repurposed. This one, removed. That one, spare. None of these are tied to the network. There is no path." He paused and then did a small thing, took a pocket tester out, and clipped 2 leads onto what had been the pair for 72.4. He held the tester to his ear. I held my breath not because I thought I'd missed something, but because holding breath is what you do when the night wants to make a shape out of air. The tester hissed a little, like a shell to an ear. Then, faint and regular, a single beep, about every 30 seconds. He met my eyes. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look pleased either. "Induced voltage," he said quietly. "Could be. Or a stray from a device somewhere misbehaving. But there shouldn't be enough to carry anything to anyone. Control. We're getting a 5th call. 4 seconds. The operator reports a ringback tone starting, then stopping. Tone again at 30 seconds, then drop. The Road Center's operator says their system also lit up for a moment. They're bringing a tech in from home. We took the sensible steps. Cones at the start of the lay-by. Hazard lights left on. A walk down the verge with our torches in a shallow arc so the beam brushed every piece of barrier and post for a fresh dent or scrape. I went down the embankment to the tree line to check where deer and boar paths crossed the ditch, not because it had anything to do with a phone call, but because looking in places your feet won't thank you for later is part of what buys you sleep. The undergrowth had been flattened in old patterns, nothing new. The trees stood there being trees. That's often the best thing they can be. A lorry eased past us in the slow lane, and the driver dipped his headlights twice in the old language. "That means I see you, and I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to do." The lay-by itself smelled like diesel and damp leaves, and a sweet coal that belongs to pine and nothing else. We stood by the empty bolt pattern again. My partner had his hand on the concrete as if he could feel a life in it. I looked at the little green insect trapped between the concrete and the cap, the first of a season still too far away to matter, and I thought, stupidly, that I'd prefer a person to talk to. The tech arrived in a van with a logo. He was younger than the duty manager and wore the permanent readiness of someone who expects to be asked to make something behave that isn't inclined to. He carried a different tester. He clipped onto the pair in the cabinet and frowned at numbers I couldn't see. He called someone on a headset and spoke in a language of pairs and blocks and cards. He asked a remote operator to take a block out of service. We all stood very still for a handful of seconds. The hiss in his earpiece faded a shade and then came back as if nothing had changed. The beep kept its time like a watch you forgot you were wearing. "Remote says there's no card tied to this in the exchange," he said, polite and baffled. "It's flagged retired in the system. But something is presenting to 110 with that ID. It could be a mislabeled device somewhere else." He shrugged with his eyebrows. "Or it could be the network being a network." I don't get annoyed when someone tells me a thing I can't arrest is the network being a network. I've been doing this too long. I asked a different question. "Has anyone else reported odd calls from retired columns?" He nodded. "One up past the river did it for a month after we cut it. Stopped when we pulled the last bit of copper. We think condensation in a junction box miles away bridged a path when the temperature swung at night. It convinced a machine that liked being convinced, but that routed to our center. It didn't go straight to police. We stayed 40 more minutes. We did a slow roll through the next few kilometers just in case the map had lied by a little and the sound had wiggled along a wire to a different place than the one the computer liked. The road gave us nothing except its usual. The sheet metal whispers of the guardrail, the metallic sigh of expansion joints as they cooled, the voices of lorries carrying whole lives in their trailers. On the way back, Control told us the calls had stopped. The road center's report later read like the ones they send when they've done everything sensible, checked cabinets, checked logs, pulled power to a segment just to see if Defiance lived there, unable to reproduce, possible transient-induced voltage causing false call presentation. Further action. Monitor. It said. The tech added, not in the report but to us over coffee a couple of days later. "It bothers me when it routes right to you. That means it knows where it lives." 2 weeks after, at roughly the same hour, Control's voice took on that flattest tone that sits just this side of curious. "Open 110 from the same ID. 7 seconds. Wind. Tone." The operator thinks she heard a faint breath. We went. Same lay-by, same cap on the conduit. The air smelled of wet soil because a shower had come through and left everything thinking about rain. The traffic had that settled rhythm nights get when the world has decided to wait until dawn to become complicated. We stood on the same bit of concrete and listened to our own breath bounce off the side of a truck 50 meters away and come back to us in a different temperature. On one of those nights, we heard it ourselves, the little ring, like a desk phone with a small bell. 2 notes that were almost one, right in that spot between the noise of tires and the breath of trees. It could have been anything. A tiny piece of metal in the barrier singing when a certain crosswind hit it. A chain on a truck deck finding a resonance and giving it to us. My own brain playing old sounds, too, catching our headlamps like it wanted to make sure we knew where we were. Where the column had been, there was a square of concrete with 4 bolt heads and a plastic conduit capped flush with the surface. No post, no box, just the ghost of one. "Control, two on scene," I said, stepping out, the wind finding the gap at the back of my collar that I didn't know was there. "Received. Be advised. 3rd open line. 10 seconds. Operator says, wind, traffic, 1 tone. No speech. Duty manager from the road authority is en route. 10 minutes. We stood and listened. Our car ticked as parts cooled. A truck went by, tires hissing, diesel note steady and civilized. Farther down the straight, another truck answered with its own version of the same song. The capped conduit at our feet did what plastic does in the cold, kept its shape and pretended it had never had a purpose. "Police," I called, even though I wasn't calling into an open window or a hedge or a house. "If you called us, wave a light, shout." It sounds foolish when you say it out loud to open air and a patch of concrete, but I've done this long enough to know foolish is cheaper than what you feel. If you don't do it and later learn, you should have. My partner crouched by the base and put a gloved finger to the plastic. He's the sort who likes to verify a thing with more than his eyes. He tilted his head, listening. He didn't say anything, which told me he heard exactly what I heard. Motorway. Wind. The small quiet between those two when a gap opens and nothing pretends to be a third thing. White lights swung up behind us, and then dipped as a plain pickup eased into the lay-by. The road authority duty manager stepped out with a flashlight and a key ring that says, "I belong to the parts of the road you don't see." He introduced himself with that economy you learn on nights, and then he said, without me asking anything, "We pulled this one last year. Cable was cut and lifted. The number's dead at the exchange. The column got scrapped. There's nothing here. Control is getting calls from it," I said. He frowned without surprise. "We've had columns talk to us after they're gone," he said. "Old copper and rain can do tricks, but it shouldn't present as a proper ID to 110. The columns never called police directly. They called our center. We decided who to pass on to. They're saying it went straight to you?" "Operator says it came with a police emergency ID," I said. He knelt and popped the cap off the conduit stub with a flat screwdriver. Inside, black space. No cable. A strand of spider silk caught the light and drew a line from one edge to the other. He didn't reach in. He put the cap back on like he was closing a book. Control's voice came again, a breath closer, a shade more focused. "Fourth contact. 8 seconds. Operator heard your voice faintly when you said police, then tone, then drop. Road Center says their log also shows an inbound in the same second to their ID for this column, which should not be possible." The duty manager blew out through his teeth. "We'll check the cabinet 2 kilometers up," he said, "where this feed used to join the rest. Maybe a spur got left in when it was pulled." We followed him along the verge to a locked gray cabinet that sat in the little triangle between the lay-by and the slope down to trees. He opened it with a key like every other key, and every key at once. Inside, tidy rows of terminals and a few spare loops of cable, neatly labeled in handwriting that looked like a person who still uses pencil. He ran his light along the rows and tapped labels with the back of a fingernail. "This pair is dead," he said almost to himself. "This one's repurposed. This one, removed. That one, spare. None of these are tied to the network. There is no path." He paused and then did a small thing, took a pocket tester out, and clipped 2 leads onto what had been the pair for 72.4. He held the tester to his ear. I held my breath not because I thought I'd missed something, but because holding breath is what you do when the night wants to make a shape out of air. The tester hissed a little, like a shell to an ear. Then, faint and regular, a single beep, about every 30 seconds. He met my eyes. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look pleased either. "Induced voltage," he said quietly. "Could be. Or a stray from a device somewhere misbehaving. But there shouldn't be enough to carry anything to anyone. Control. We're getting a 5th call. 4 seconds. The operator reports a ringback tone starting, then stopping. Tone again at 30 seconds, then drop. The Road Center's operator says their system also lit up for a moment. They're bringing a tech in from home. We took the sensible steps. Cones at the start of the lay-by. Hazard lights left on. A walk down the verge with our torches in a shallow arc so the beam brushed every piece of barrier and post for a fresh dent or scrape. I went down the embankment to the tree line to check where deer and boar paths crossed the ditch, not because it had anything to do with a phone call, but because looking in places your feet won't thank you for later is part of what buys you sleep. The undergrowth had been flattened in old patterns, nothing new. The trees stood there being trees. That's often the best thing they can be. A lorry eased past us in the slow lane, and the driver dipped his headlights twice in the old language. That means I see you, and I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to do. The lay-by itself smelled like diesel and damp leaves, and a sweet coal that belongs to pine and nothing else. We stood by the empty bolt pattern again. My partner had his hand on the concrete as if he could feel a life in it. I looked at the little green insect trapped between the concrete and the cap, the first of a season still too far away to matter, and I thought, stupidly, that I'd prefer a person to talk to. The tech arrived in a van with a logo. He was younger than the duty manager and wore the permanent readiness of someone who expects to be asked to make something behave that isn't inclined to. He carried a different tester. He clipped onto the pair in the cabinet and frowned at numbers I couldn't see. He called someone on a headset and spoke in a language of pairs and blocks and cards. He asked a remote operator to take a block out of service. We all stood very still for a handful of seconds. The hiss in his earpiece faded a shade and then came back as if nothing had changed. The beep kept its time like a watch you forgot you were wearing. Remote says there's no card tied to this in the exchange, he said, polite and baffled. It's flagged retired in the system. But something is presenting to 110 with that ID. It could be a mislabeled device somewhere else. He shrugged with his eyebrows. Or it could be the network being a network. I don't get annoyed when someone tells me a thing I can't arrest is the network being a network. I've been doing this too long. I asked a different question. Has anyone else reported odd calls from retired columns? He nodded. One up past the river did it for a month after we cut it. Stopped when we pulled the last bit of copper. We think condensation in a junction box miles away bridged a path when the temperature swung at night. It convinced a machine that liked being convinced, but that routed to our center. It didn't go straight to police. We stayed 40 more minutes. We did a slow roll through the next few kilometers just in case the map had lied by a little and the sound had wiggled along a wire to a different place than the one the computer liked. The road gave us nothing except its usual. The sheet metal whispers of the guardrail. The metallic sigh of expansion joints as they cooled. The voices of lorries carrying whole lives in their trailers. On the way back, Control told us the calls had stopped. The road center's report later read like the ones they send when they've done everything sensible. Checked cabinets, checked logs, pulled power to a segment just to see if Defiance lived there. Unable to reproduce. Possible transient-induced voltage causing false call presentation. Further action. Monitor. It said. The tech added, not in the report but to us over coffee a couple of days later. It bothers me when it routes right to you. That means it knows where it lives. 2 weeks after, at roughly the same hour, Control's voice took on that flattest tone that sits just this side of curious. Open 110 from the same ID. 7 seconds. Wind. Tone. The operator thinks she heard a faint breath. We went. Same lay-by, same cap on the conduit. The air smelled of wet soil because a shower had come through and left everything thinking about rain. The traffic had that settled rhythm nights get when the world has decided to wait until dawn to become complicated. We stood on the same bit of concrete and listened to our own breath bounce off the side of a truck 50 meters away and come back to us in a different temperature. On one of those nights, we heard it ourselves, the little ring, like a desk phone with a small bell. 2 notes that were almost one, right in that spot between the noise of tires and the breath of trees. It could have been anything. A tiny piece of metal in the barrier singing when a certain crosswind hit it. A chain on a truck deck finding a resonance and giving it to us. My own brain playing old sounds to